Speak up. Where did you get it? Jonathan Whitmore roared. Both of his hands tightened into fists, and his face turned so cold that Annie Carter felt as if her heart had stopped. Where did you get this necklace? Annie was still kneeling on the floor of the long, endless hallway. The mop had fallen sideways beside her. The bucket of pine-scented floor water trembled slightly after the young girl's sudden backward movement. Annie edged back on her knees, one trembling hand reaching for the small silver chain that had slipped from her collar and fallen onto the cold stone floor. Her fingers closed around it as if it were the only thing she had left in the world. "Sir," she stammered, clutching the necklace to her chest. "Sir, please." Jonathan took another step toward her. He was still wearing the coat he had come home in. The buttons had not yet been undone. His tie hung loose at his throat, but his eyes were fixed on the tiny silver pendant in Annie's hand, as if the object had just risen from the grave of a past he had spent years trying to bury. "I am asking you again," he said, his voice louder now. Each word struck the high walls and echoed back. "Where did you get that necklace?" Annie's lips parted, but no sound came out. She had been in the Whitmore house for less than one morning. Mrs. Grace, the family's longtime housekeeper, had taken her down to the laundry room, handed her a stack of towels, and told her to clean the hallway before lunch. And now the richest man in Charleston was standing over her, looking at her as if she were a thief caught with stolen silver in her hand. "It belongs to me, sir," Annie whispered. Jonathan's eyes widened. "To you?" He let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. It sounded more like pain being dragged through anger. "To you," he repeated slowly. "Do you have any idea what you are holding?" Annie's hand shook so badly that the necklace trembled in her palm. "Yes, sir," she answered. "I know. It is my family's necklace." The moment the words left her mouth, Jonathan bent down. He snatched the necklace from Annie's hand. She flinched and pulled her hand back as if she had touched fire. "This is the necklace I gave my wife," he said. His voice dropped lower, but somehow that made the hallway feel even colder. "It disappeared years ago, and today, it falls out of the collar of a girl mopping the floors in my house." Annie looked up at him. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. "Sir, I did not steal it. I swear to you, I did not steal it. My mother gave it to me." "Your mother?" Jonathan turned the pendant over with stiff fingers. On the old silver surface was the image of a small oak tree, its two branches crossing in the center. The edges had been worn smooth by time. He turned it over. The name was still there. "Eleanor." Jonathan's throat tightened. At that moment, the sound of a woman's heels came from the far end of the hallway. Victoria Whitmore appeared, her phone still in her hand. At first, her expression was calm, until she saw the scene in front of her. Annie kneeling on the floor, Jonathan holding the necklace, and the mop lying between them like a piece of evidence. "Jonathan?" Victoria asked. "What is going on?" He did not take his eyes off Annie. "She has Eleanor's necklace." Victoria's gaze swept over Annie's plain uniform, her old sneakers, and then stopped on her hands. "Red from cleaning solution." "Oh," she said softly. "Well, that explains enough." Annie quickly shook her head. "No, ma'am, it is not like that. I did not take anything." Before Victoria could answer, Mrs. Grace hurried in from the direction of the laundry room, wiping her hands on her apron as she came. She must have heard Jonathan's voice and rushed over, but the moment she saw the necklace in his hand, her face changed. Her eyes shifted to Annie. The fear in them quickly turned into accusation. "You only started working here this morning, and you already dared to steal from this house?" Mrs. Grace said, her voice as sharp as a knife. Annie's mouth fell open. That accusation hurt her more than Jonathan's anger, because Mrs. Grace had been the first person she met at the back door. She was the one who had shown Annie where to hang her coat. She was the one who had told her where to find clean rags. For one brief hour, Annie had thought the older woman might be kind. "No," Annie said, her voice breaking. "My mother gave it to me. She said it was something left behind by a relative." Mrs. Grace looked her up and down. The last bit of hope in Annie disappeared when she saw the contempt in the woman's eyes. "A relative," Mrs. Grace repeated bitterly. "Girls who walk into houses like this always come with a few stories ready in their pockets. I should have checked your pockets the moment you arrived." "I did not have it in my pocket," Annie said. "I was wearing it around my neck. And does that make it better?" Mrs. Grace turned to Victoria. Her voice softened at once. "Miss Victoria, I am truly sorry. I watched her sign in for work myself, but I never imagined she would be bold enough to bring something like that out in the open. Victoria lifted her chin. She seemed pleased by the support, but she was wise enough not to show it too openly. Grace, you did everything you could. Some people are simply born to take advantage of trust. Mrs. Grace nodded again and again. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Then she turned to Jonathan, her face suddenly full of pain, as if she were the one who had been betrayed. Mr. Whitmore, I take full responsibility. I should never have allowed her through the laundry area. Mrs. Whitmore's belongings should have always been safe under my care. Annie felt herself growing smaller with every word. She was still kneeling on the floor. One knee was soaked with mop water. One hand gripped the baseboard to keep herself from falling. Please, Annie said, looking straight at Jonathan because he was holding her necklace. I know this sounds strange, but I did not take it from this house. My mother kept it wrapped in a handkerchief in the closet. Last month, when we were short on rent, she finally gave it to me. I asked her if we should sell it. She said no. She told me that no matter how hard things got, I must never sell it. Jonathan's fingers tightened around the pendant. Why? Because she said there was a name engraved on it, Annie replied. She said that name was important. Victoria stepped closer. And you expect us to believe that? A necklace engraved with Eleanor's name just happens to appear around your neck, and you know nothing about it? Annie shook her head. I do not know why her name is on it. I only know what my mother told me. Mrs. Grace let out a contemptuous laugh. Your mother should have taught you not to touch what does not belong to you. Annie's face tightened, but she did not answer. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment. What is your mother's name? Marion Carter, sir. The name did not strike him the way Eleanor's name had, but something in Annie's voice made him pause. Victoria noticed it immediately. Jonathan, do not turn this into a drama, she said coldly. Call the agency. Search her things. Then, dismiss her. Mrs. Grace nodded at once. That would be best, sir. Quiet and proper. Annie's chest tightened. Quiet and proper. That was how rich people ruined a poor girl's future without ever needing to raise their voices. I can prove I am not lying, Annie said. Jonathan looked up. His face was still cold, but something in his eyes had changed. You said it belonged to you. Then you said your mother gave it to you. Now you say you can prove it. Do you understand what this necklace means to me? Yes, sir, Annie answered, though in truth, she did not fully understand. No, you do not. His voice rose again. I gave it to Eleanor on our first wedding anniversary. For years, she wore it around her neck every morning. Then one day, she came back from a trip without it. I asked her about it, and she refused to tell me. She carried that secret with her until the day she died. And now you are kneeling here, telling me it came from your mother, and you expect me to believe that? Annie clasped her hands together to stop them from trembling. I do not expect you to believe me right away, sir. I am only telling you what I know. That is not enough. Mrs. Grace took a deep breath, then stepped closer to Victoria, one hand pressed to her chest. Mr. Whitmore, please do not let this upset you too much. This is my fault. I should have been more careful. I should have checked her background more thoroughly. The agency said she was quiet and hardworking, so I let my heart soften. Pity clouded my judgment. Annie looked at Mrs. Grace. The woman's eyes were lowered, but at the corner of her mouth, there was a faint satisfaction she could not fully hide. She was trying to prove her loyalty by making Annie look guilty. Victoria gently placed a hand on Mrs. Grace's arm. Do not blame yourself. You have served this family for many years. Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Grace said, her voice almost a whisper. But Mrs. Eleanor was always so kind to me. Today, I have failed her. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Eleanor's name had always been his deepest wound, and Mrs. Grace knew it. Annie saw it too. She saw how the older woman's false grief quickly turned into a net, falling over her shoulders, tightening around her, forcing her into the role of a thief. I have proof, Annie said louder now. She was not rude. She did not shout, but her voice was clear enough for the whole hallway to hear. I am not making this up. My mother kept it with a photograph. Victoria pressed her lips together. Then bring that proof here, Annie Carter. But until then, do not mistake pity for trust. Annie lowered her head. Yes, ma'am. Jonathan still held the necklace tightly. For a moment, It seemed he did not want to let it go, as if that small piece of silver was the last bit of Eleanor's warmth left in the world. Then he looked down at Annie's hands. They were still open, still waiting, still trembling, and perhaps some part of him suddenly understood the cruelty of taking away the last thing a poor girl had, while accusing her of taking something from him. At last, Jonathan returned the necklace. Annie took it with both hands. She pressed it to her chest carefully, as if she were holding a wound, but she did not put it back around her neck. Jonathan looked at the mop, then at the rag lying beside the bucket. This time, he did not pick anything up. The anger inside him had not yet settled. "Mrs. Grace," he said. "Yes, sir," the housekeeper answered at once. "Pay her for the full day." Mrs. Grace blinked. "For the entire day, sir?" "She worked. Pay her." Victoria turned sharply toward him. "Jonathan, surely you are not going to let her leave with that necklace?" Jonathan looked at the pendant in Annie's hand. His face tightened again, but his voice was lower now. "I will not call the police on a girl based on a photograph I have not seen and a mother I have not spoken to." Annie stood still. Mrs. Grace showed a flash of displeasure, but quickly hid it. "Yes, sir, as you wish." Jonathan turned back to Annie. "Tomorrow you will bring the proof." Annie nodded. "Yes, sir. And tell your mother I want to speak with her." Annie hesitated. "I can tell her, but I cannot promise she will agree." Something passed across Jonathan's face then. Too quick to name, too deep to ignore. "That will do." Victoria let out a quiet breath through her nose, but said nothing more. Annie slowly stood up. Her knees ached. Her palms smelled strongly of floor cleaner, and the necklace in her hand suddenly felt strangely heavy, as if it were made not only of silver, but of secrets buried for years. She bent down and picked up the mop, not because she still wanted to work there, but because leaving it on the floor would only give Mrs. Grace one more reason to look down on her. Annie carefully leaned the mop against the wall. Mrs. Grace stepped aside, but not out of kindness. "Go to the back office to receive your pay," she said, "and do not touch anything on your way." Annie nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She walked toward the staff room, her hand clenched tightly around the necklace. Behind her, Jonathan Whitmore remained standing in the wide hallway, motionless, like a man who had just seen the ghost of his past. On one side was his dead wife. On the other was the poor girl whom the whole house had just condemned. Annie did not look back until she reached the bus stop 3 blocks away from the Whitmore house. Behind her, the iron gate closed with a soft mechanical hum. The sound was too quiet, too polite. Nothing like the way it felt, as if a door had just slammed shut on her life. Cars still moved silently beneath the shade of the trees. The people behind their steering wheels continued on with their day. A woman walking her dog still bent down to adjust the leash. A delivery truck still stopped at the corner. The world did not know that Annie Carter had just been humiliated, and it did not care. She clenched the necklace tightly in her palm, so tightly that the silver edges pressed into her skin. The envelope holding her wages for the day was inside her purse, a thin white envelope with no name written on it. Mrs. Grace had counted each bill in the back office without once looking Annie in the eye. "Mr. Whitmore said to pay you for the full day," she muttered, her voice annoyed, as if the money had been taken from her own kitchen drawer. Then she pushed the envelope across the desk with 2 fingers, as though touching it any longer might dirty her hand. "You heard him. Bring the proof tomorrow, and don't think that pitiful look on your face is going to solve anything." Annie had not answered, not because she had nothing to say, but because if she had opened her mouth at that moment, she was afraid she would burst into tears right in front of the woman who was waiting to see exactly that. The bus was late. Annie sat near the middle, her purse on her lap and her work shoes tucked beneath the seat. She had wiped her hands on her skirt more times than she could count, but her palms still smelled faintly of floor cleaner. The scent of pine, the scent of cold stone floors, the scent of a morning when all she had wanted was to do honest work and go home with a little money to help her mother pay the bills. She wanted to close her eyes, but every time her lashes fell, Jonathan Whitmore's voice echoed in her mind. "Where did you get it?" That question was not just a question. It was the look of suspicion. It was the hand that had snatched the necklace from hers. It was Mrs. Grace's contemptuous laugh. It was the way Victoria Whitmore had looked her up and down, as if poverty itself were a crime. By the time Annie reached North Charleston, the afternoon heat had softened over the cracked sidewalks. She passed the drugstore on the corner, the laundromat with 2 broken machines marked "out of order." and the small diner where Marion sometimes picked up extra shifts when her breathing allowed it. The apartment she shared with her mother was on the second floor of an old brick building. The paint near the stair railing had peeled away in patches. Each step creaked softly under Annie's feet, as if the building itself had grown tired of standing for so long. When she reached the door, Annie stopped. She opened her hand and looked down at the necklace. Before, it had always seemed simple. A small silver chain. An old pendant. Something her mother had told her to keep safe. But now, it seemed like something that had been waiting in silence. Waiting for the right person to see it. Waiting for the right wound to be touched. Annie took a breath and opened the door. Marion Carter was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of her lay a spread of bills and a cup of tea that had gone cold. She lifted her head the moment Annie stepped inside. Mothers often have a strange kind of instinct. They can read the pain on their child's face before the child has even figured out how to hide it. And Marion saw everything. "You're home early," she said. Annie closed the door. For a long moment, she only stood there, her hand still wrapped tightly around the necklace. Then she asked, "Mama, who is Eleanor Whitmore?" If Annie's pain touched your heart, please like this video and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Your support helps this story reach more people who believe in truth, justice, and kindness. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. That question changed the air in the small kitchen. Marion's hand slipped slightly toward the edge of the table. Not quickly, not dramatically, but enough for Annie to notice. Her fingers gripped the hospital bill in front of her, as if a thin piece of paper could keep her from falling apart. "Where did you hear that name?" "At the Whitmore house." Annie stepped closer. "Mr. Whitmore saw the necklace. He said it belonged to his wife. He said he gave it to her. He said it disappeared years ago." Marion closed her eyes. The silence made Annie's heart ache. She had tried to stay strong from the moment she walked away from that iron gate. But standing in front of her mother, in the little kitchen that smelled of cold tea and cough medicine, she suddenly felt small again, like she had when she was a child. "He thought I stole it," Annie said. Marion's eyes opened wide. "He accused you?" "Yes." "Did anyone touch you?" "No." Annie swallowed hard, but he snatched it out of my hand. Mrs. Grace acted as if I had walked in there just to steal. And Victoria Whitmore stood there looking at me like she already knew what kind of person I was. Marion rose from her chair too quickly and immediately broke into a coughing fit. Annie reached out to steady her, but Marion waved her away, perhaps more ashamed of her weakness than of the cough itself. "Sit down, sweetheart," Marion said hoarsely. "I don't want to sit down." Annie's voice trembled. "I want to know why the richest man in Charleston thinks the necklace you gave me belonged to his dead wife." Marion looked around the small kitchen. At the unpaid bills, at the chipped sugar bowl, at the window facing the sunlit parking lot. There was a tiredness on her face that Annie had grown used to seeing. But today, beneath that tiredness, there was something else. Guilt. "I should have told you more," Marion said. Annie's anger softened a little. Not because it had disappeared, but because, in that moment, her mother looked smaller than she had that morning. So small that Annie could not bear to push her any harder. "Then tell me now," she said. "Right now," Marion nodded slowly. "Get the blue tin box from my closet." Annie went into the bedroom. The room was small, just large enough for a bed, an old dresser, and a wooden chair by the window. She found the box on the highest shelf, behind a stack of neatly folded towels. It was the same tin box that had once held Christmas cookies years ago. Marion had wrapped several rubber bands around it, as if the past inside might spill out if it were not held shut. Annie carried the box back and placed it on the kitchen table. Marion opened it herself. Inside were old envelopes, yellowed birthday cards, a few receipts, and a photograph Annie knew well but had never truly studied. Marion picked up the photograph first. In it, two women stood outside a country church. They had their arms linked together and were smiling at whoever had taken the picture. Annie had always known that one of them was her mother. The other was Aunt Ellie, the woman who had sent cards and money to Annie until the day she died. Marion touched the edge of the photograph. Her real name was Eleanor, she said. After she married, she became Eleanor Whitmore. Before that, she was Eleanor Carter. Anya sat down. Her legs suddenly felt weak. "She was my sister," Marion said. "My twin sister." Annie looked at the photograph again. That face, those eyes, that smile, now she could not fail to see it. Why didn't you tell me? I did tell you she was family. You only told me pieces. I know. Why? Marian drew in a deep breath. It caught near the end, as if it had snagged on something that had been lodged inside her chest for years. Because Eleanor asked me to stay quiet for a while. Then she got sick. After she died, that silence became a habit I didn't know how to break. That answer isn't enough, Mama. No, Marian said softly. It isn't. She folded her arms, as if trying to hold herself together. Your aunt married into a family that never truly accepted her. They smiled in public. They praised her at charity events. They put her picture in society pages when it made them look generous and civilized. But behind closed doors, there were always whispers. Marian paused. Not always loud, not always direct, and that was the worst part. Some people can make you bleed, then still make you look rude for daring to say it hurts. Annie's throat tightened. Eleanor loved Jonathan, Marian continued. I believe that. And I believe he loved her too. But love in a family like that always comes with rules made by other people. She had to be careful about everything. How she dressed, how she spoke, which relatives she mentioned, which parts of her past had to stay hidden. So she hid us. Marian flinched slightly. Then she lowered her head. Yes. Annie looked down at the necklace. Because we were poor? Because we were poor, Marian answered. Because we are black. Because I worked jobs they considered beneath them. Because you and I lived in places they would never set foot in unless there was a ribbon-cutting ceremony and a camera nearby. Marian's voice remained steady, but her eyes had turned red. She was not ashamed of us, Annie. She was ashamed of the way they treated us. Annie wanted to believe that. She truly did, but part of her still hurt. Part of her was still the girl who had been kneeling on the Whitmore floor, being looked at like a thief, simply because she had worn something that belonged to her own blood. She sent money, Marian said, not to buy silence, but to help us get through hard days. Money for your school clothes, medicine, food when I was out of work. Your first winter coat came from her. Your books too. She wrote your name by hand in every card. Annie remembered that blue coat. She had loved it so much that she kept wearing it even after the weather began to warm, even when the sleeves had grown a little too short. Marian reached into the tin box and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a note written in soft, beautiful handwriting. Annie picked it up and read it. For Annie, when she is old enough to keep meaningful things, tell her this is love, not obligation. Annie read the sentence twice. By the second time, the words had begun to blur. She gave you this necklace? Annie asked. Marian nodded. A few months before she died. She said she was going away to rest for a while, but I knew she was sicker than she wanted to admit. That afternoon, she came here. Jonathan didn't know. She sat right where you are sitting now and took the necklace off her neck. Marian looked at the chain in Annie's hand. I told her to keep it. She said no. She said that if she left this world before she had told the whole truth, then at least something with her name on it should stay with us. Annie's fingers tightened around the pendant. Why didn't she tell him? Marian was silent for a long time. Fear can live beside love, Annie, she said quietly. People don't like to hear that, but it's true. Eleanor was afraid of what Jonathan's family would do with the truth. She was afraid they would turn me into a joke and turn you into some poor child they could use to show off their kindness. She was afraid Jonathan would try to fix everything with money and accidentally make it worse. She swallowed, and perhaps by the time she truly wanted to tell him, she had been silent too long. By then, speaking the truth no longer felt like telling the truth. It felt like confessing to a mistake. Annie turned toward the window. The parking lot below shimmered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere down in the yard, a car radio was playing an old hymn, the sound so low it seemed like a memory coming from far away. He wants to meet you, Annie said. Marian's shoulders stiffened. I told him I couldn't promise you would agree. You were right. Will you go? Marian did not answer right away. She gathered the letters and placed them back into the tin box more slowly than usual. What did he look like when he saw the photograph? She asked. I didn't show it to him. Marian looked up. You didn't? He didn't believe me. He told me to bring proof tomorrow. I had the photograph, but everything happened too fast. Mrs. Grace kept standing there, making everything worse. I could not let them pass that photograph around like evidence in a courtroom while I stood there being judged. A small flash of pride crossed Marian's face. Good. Annie lowered her head. I was so scared. Marian looked at her for a long time. Being scared does not mean you lost your dignity. Annie let out a breath. It was the first thing all day that made her feel as if she could breathe again. Marian closed the tin box and pushed it toward her. Tomorrow, you take the photograph. Take the letter too. But you do not beg. Do you hear me? Yes, Mama. If Jonathan Whitmore wants the truth, then he must receive it with respect. And if he only wants to accuse, then let him do that by himself. We do not need to help anyone make us small. Annie nodded, but her stomach twisted at the thought of going back to that house tomorrow, of walking through that iron gate again, of seeing Mrs. Grace, of standing before Victoria Whitmore, of facing the eyes of the man who had made her tremble on the hallway floor. Marian reached across the table and placed her thin hand over her daughter's. I'm sorry, Annie. For what? For letting you walk into a place filled with so much history I had never explained to you. Annie looked at her mother's hand. Thin, warm, trembling slightly. You were just trying to protect me, weren't you? Yes. Then I understand. She was quiet for a moment. But it still hurts. Marian nodded. You are allowed to hurt. The two of them sat together with that truth for a long time. Neither of them tried to fix it. Neither of them told the other to be stronger. Sometimes, the gentlest thing a person can do for someone they love is sit beside them and let the pain exist without judgment. That night, Annie placed the necklace on the small table beside her bed, next to the photograph and the note. She did not wear it to sleep. For the first time in her life, the necklace no longer felt comforting. It felt more like a question made of silver, a question bearing Eleanor's name. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore house, Jonathan stood alone in Eleanor's old sitting room. Victoria had followed him in there, still speaking in a soft but warning tone. She reminded him not to let his emotions lead him. She reminded him that people like Annie could make up any story they wanted. She reminded him that the Whitmore family's reputation should not be dragged into some cheap little drama. But Jonathan had asked her to leave. Mrs. Grace had also lingered near the doorway for a long while, as if simply standing there might allow her to hear what the past was breathing out. At last, he told her to leave as well. Now the room belonged only to him. Jonathan opened the drawer of Eleanor's writing desk, the drawer he had not touched in years. Inside were a few pens long dried of ink, a stack of old stationery, a pair of reading glasses, and the faint scent of lavender. Somehow, grief had preserved that fragrance for the woman who was gone. He stood there for a long time. Then he slowly closed the drawer, and the memory returned. He remembered the day Eleanor came home from her final trip. Her neck had been bare. Her eyes were red. Her hand kept rising to the place where the necklace used to rest, as if her body still remembered something she had chosen to let go. He had asked her, "Where's the necklace?" Eleanor had looked at him for a long time. Then she had answered, "Some things are safer when they are protected by love." At the time, Jonathan had thought illness had made her say strange things. Now, he was no longer sure. Jonathan sat down in the chair by the window. Outside, darkness slowly settled over the back garden. The window panes reflected his face back at him, older, lonelier, and filled with questions he had avoided for far too long. He sat there until the room was completely dark. By sunrise, Annie had already dressed for work, though her stomach told her not to go. She stood at the small kitchen counter while Marian wrapped the photograph and Eleanor's note in a clean white handkerchief. The necklace lay beside them, the old silver oak turned face up, the name on the back hidden against the table. "You don't have to go alone," Marian said. Annie shook her head. "You coughed half the night." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I have." Marian tied the handkerchief with care. Not too tight, not too loose. "If he raises his voice again, you leave. I don't care about the job. I don't care about the money. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "And if that Victoria woman speaks down to you, you don't trade insults. You just say what is true. A clean truth does not need a dirty mouth to defend it." Annie almost smiled. "You practice that?" "I've lived long enough to earn it." They stood there in the pale light coming through the blinds. The apartment was quiet except for the old refrigerator kicking on and the distant sound of traffic. Annie put the handkerchief bundle into her bag, then slipped the necklace around her neck. It rested beneath her shirt, cold against her skin. Marian noticed. "You're wearing it? You told me not to sell it." You didn't tell me to hide it. A small pain crossed Marion's face, mixed with pride. Eleanor would have liked that answer. At the bus stop, Annie kept one hand on her bag the whole ride. Men in work boots climbed on downtown. A nurse in blue scrubs dozed near the window. A man with a folded newspaper gave up his seat to an older woman without saying a word. It was the kind of ordinary morning Annie had always trusted, because ordinary mornings did not ask her to defend who she was. But the closer the bus came to the Whitmore neighborhood, the less ordinary the day felt. When Annie reached the back entrance, Mrs. Grace was waiting before she knocked. Her apron was tied tight, her hair pinned back, her mouth already set. "You came back," Mrs. Grace said. "Mr. Whitmore told me to. That doesn't mean you should have." Annie held her bag with both hands. "I brought what he asked for." Mrs. Grace's eyes lowered to the bag. "We'll see what you brought." Annie said nothing. Marion had been right. A clean truth did not need a dirty mouth. Mrs. Grace opened the door wider and let her in. "Wipe your shoes." Annie did. Twice. The kitchen staff moved more quietly than the day before. A cook stirred grits at the stove. Someone sliced tomatoes for a luncheon tray. Coffee hissed in the machine. Nobody greeted Annie, but everyone knew. In a large house, news traveled faster than footsteps. By breakfast, every hallway had learned that the new girl had been accused of wearing Mrs. Whitmore's lost necklace. Mrs. Grace pointed toward the laundry room. "Leave your coat. Mr. Whitmore wants you in the library." "The library?" "You heard me." Mrs. Grace leaned closer. "And don't start thinking this means anything. Rich men get curious. Then they get tired. Girls like you should remember that." Annie hung her coat slowly. "May I ask something, Mrs. Grace?" The older woman folded her arms. "What? Were you kind to Mrs. Whitmore?" The question landed in a place Mrs. Grace had not prepared. Her face hardened. "Don't speak of her. I only asked because yesterday you said you cared about her memory." Mrs. Grace stepped nearer, lowering her voice. "I served her. I kept her rooms. I did what was proper. That wasn't what I asked." For a second, Mrs. Grace had no answer. Then she turned away. "Library, now." Annie walked through the service hall and into the main part of the house. The floors had been cleaned before she arrived. Sunlight fell across the staircase and the long-runner rug. On the walls, framed portraits of Whitmore men and women watched over the hall with old confidence. Annie kept her eyes forward. She would not let painted faces make her feel smaller. The library door was half open. Jonathan stood near the window, dressed in a dark suit but without a tie. He had not shaved well. A gray line of stubble marked his jaw, and there were shadows under his eyes. On the desk lay a leather folder, a glass of water, and the necklace's memory between them, though Annie still wore it. Victoria sat in an armchair as if the meeting had been arranged for her comfort. She held a cup of coffee she had not touched. "You're late," Victoria said. Annie checked the clock on the mantel. "I'm 10 minutes early, ma'am." Victoria's mouth tightened. Jonathan turned. His face was controlled, but Annie could see the strain in it. "Miss Carter." "Mr. Whitmore. You brought proof?" "Yes, sir." "Then let's have it." Victoria set down her cup. "Jonathan, before she begins, I want it noted that anything she presents should be verified. People can produce old papers. Photographs can be found. Stories can be rehearsed." Jonathan did not answer her. "Miss Carter." Annie opened her bag and took out the white handkerchief. She placed it on the desk, then unfolded it. First came the photograph. Then, Eleanor's note. Last, 3 birthday cards tied with a faded ribbon. She did not push them toward him. She simply laid them down and stepped back. Jonathan picked up the photograph first. The room changed. Annie had seen shock on his face the day before, but this was different. Yesterday, he had seen the possibility of something. Now the proof was in his hand. The 2 women in the photograph were not similar in a vague way. They were twin sisters. Marion and Eleanor stood together in front of the country church, their shoulders touching, their smiles too alike to argue with. Victoria rose from the chair. "Let me see." Jonathan did not hand it to her. "Jonathan." He still did not. Annie watched his fingers move to the edge of the photograph. He touched Eleanor's face, then Marion's, and the anger in him seemed to lose its place. "My wife had a sister," he said. Victoria's voice grew thin. Or this girl's mother knew someone who resembled Eleanor. Jonathan turned the photograph so Victoria could see it from where she stood. "Do not insult me." Victoria fell quiet. He picked up the note next. His eyes moved across Eleanor's handwriting. Annie knew the words by now. She had read them 3 times before leaving home. For Annie, when she is old enough to keep something that matters, tell her it comes with love, not obligation. Jonathan sat down slowly. Annie heard his breath catch, but he did not weep. He pressed his thumb against the bottom of the note, where Eleanor had signed only 1 letter. "Where did your mother get this?" he asked. "From Aunt Eleanor. Mama said she came to our apartment before she passed. She gave her the necklace and the note. She said if she never told the truth, at least something with her name should stay with us." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. "She came back from that trip without the necklace." "Yes, sir. I asked her where it was. Annie said nothing. She said some things were safer where love could reach them." His voice changed on the last words, as if repeating them hurt. "I thought the illness had made her confused." Victoria walked to the desk. "Jonathan, listen to yourself. Even if Eleanor knew these people, that does not explain why she never told you. Perhaps there was a reason. Perhaps she wanted distance." Annie lifted her head. "My mother said Aunt Eleanor was afraid." Victoria looked at her. Afraid of what? Annie felt the room tighten around that question. Of being laughed at. Of having her family turned into gossip. Of people acting polite in front of her. And cruel when she left the room. Victoria's face went cold, careful. Jonathan looked at Victoria then, truly looked at her for the first time that morning. Annie continued, quieter now. "Mama said Aunt Eleanor loved Mr. Whitmore, but she was tired of defending people who were never invited to speak for themselves." The words settled on the desk among the old cards and the photograph. Jonathan picked up one of the birthday cards. On the front was a watercolor of magnolias. Inside, Eleanor had written Annie's name in careful blue ink. "My bright girl, keep going." He read it once, then again. Mrs. Grace appeared at the doorway with a tray of coffee no one had asked for. She saw the photograph in Jonathan's hand, the cards on the desk, and her face tightened. "Sir, I brought coffee." "Leave it," Jonathan said. She set the tray down but lingered. "Is everything all right?" Victoria answered before Jonathan could. "We are determining that." Jonathan did not look away from the cards. "No. We are learning that my wife trusted this house less than I believed." No one moved. Annie felt no victory in that sentence. Only sadness. Eleanor had been gone for years, yet the room was only now beginning to hear her. Jonathan placed the note gently on the desk. "I want to meet your mother." Annie's first instinct was to refuse. Then she remembered Marion's words. If he wants the truth, he can receive it with respect. "I'll ask her," Annie said. "But she's not coming here to be judged." Jonathan looked up. This time, his voice carried no command. "Then I will go to her." Victoria made a sharp sound. "Jonathan, that is not wise." He stood. No, what was not wise was living in this house for years and mistaking silence for peace. Annie reached for the photograph, but Jonathan held it a second longer. "May I keep this until tonight?" "No, sir." He nodded at once and returned it. Annie respected that more than an apology. She gathered the photograph, the note, and the cards, wrapping them back in the handkerchief. Jonathan watched the care in her hands and seemed to understand that these papers were not props. They were all her mother had been allowed to keep. At the door, Annie paused. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes?" "My mother doesn't need money thrown at her." He took the words without offense. "What does she need?" Annie held the bundle against her chest. "To be spoken to like she mattered before yesterday." Jonathan's face shifted. And this time the hurt in it did not frighten her. "I can do that," he said, "or I can begin trying." Annie left the library with her steps steadier than when she had entered. Behind her, Victoria's voice rose in a low argument, but Jonathan did not answer right away. He was still facing the desk, where Eleanor's handwriting had been, and for the first time the house felt less certain of itself. By afternoon, Marion Carter would hear that Jonathan Whitmore wanted to come to North Charleston. By evening, a man who had spent years grieving one woman would stand before another woman with the same face and learn how much love had been hidden from him in the name of family pride. Marian did not agree right away. When Annie came home and told her Jonathan wanted to visit, Marian sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her tea mug. The tea had gone cold, but she did not move to warm it. She looked past Annie toward the window, where the evening light had turned the parking lot the color of old brass. "He said he would come here?" Marian asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Not send a driver?" "No." "Not ask us to come through his gate and sit in some room where his people can judge our shoes?" Annie shook her head. "He said he would come to you." Marian let out a slow breath. "That sounds like something Eleanor would have wanted. Do you want to see him?" Marian did not answer until the clock above the stove ticked through almost a full minute. Want is a strange word for a thing you spent years avoiding. Annie sat across from her. "You don't have to do it." "Yes, I do." Marian touched the blue tin on the table. "Not for him. For your aunt. For you. Maybe for myself, though I don't like admitting that." Annie reached for her mother's hand. "He hurt me yesterday." "I know. He accused me like I was already guilty." Marian's fingers tightened around Annie's. "Then he will hear that too." Jonathan arrived the next evening at 6, as Marian had allowed. Not 5 minutes early, not 5 minutes late. Annie heard the car before she saw him from the window. It was a black sedan, expensive but not showy. He parked near the mailboxes instead of taking the spot closest to the stairs, as if even choosing a parking space required thought now. He came alone. Marian had changed twice before he arrived. In the end, she wore a navy dress with a white collar and pinned her hair back. Annie had never seen her mother so still. Not calm. Exactly. Ready. When the knock came, Marian closed her eyes once, opened them, then nodded to Annie. Annie opened the door. Jonathan stood in the hallway holding his hat in both hands. He looked less like the man who had roared at her in the mansion, and more like someone who had spent the night in a room full of questions. His suit was plain, dark gray. No driver waited behind him. No Victoria. No Mrs. Grace. "Miss Carter," he said to Annie. "Mr. Whitmore." His eyes moved past her, then stopped on Marian. For a moment, all the manners money could buy left him. Marian stood beside the kitchen table, one hand on the back of a chair. Jonathan's face changed as if time had folded in half. Annie saw him take in her mother's eyes, her mouth, the shape of her face. The same face that had lived for years in a portrait at Whitmore House. "Eleanor," he whispered, then caught himself. "I'm sorry." Marian's voice was firm, though Annie knew what it cost her. "My name is Marian Carter." "Yes," he swallowed. "Mrs. Carter." She pointed to the chair. "You may sit." Jonathan stepped inside. The apartment seemed smaller with him in it. Not because he tried to fill it, but because he clearly did not know how to stand in a life so different from his own. He noticed the bills stacked near the sugar bowl, the pill organizer by the sink, the worn couch with the knitted throw over one arm. To his credit, he did not pretend not to see them. Marian poured iced tea into 3 glasses. Annie knew her mother had made it because manners were the one thing poverty had never taken from her. Jonathan accepted the glass with both hands. "Thank you." No one drank. Marian sat first. Annie sat beside her. Jonathan remained on the other side of the table, leaving space between them. "I owe your daughter an apology," he said. Annie looked down. Marian did not soften. "You do. I accused her without listening. I let grief speak before decency could. That does not excuse it." "No, it does not." Jonathan nodded. "I know." Marian looked at him for a long moment. "Eleanor said you were proud, but not cruel. I held on to that when she married you. Yesterday made me wonder if she had been too generous." The words hit him. Annie saw it, but he did not defend himself. "She was often generous where I did not deserve it," he said. Marian reached for the blue tin and opened it. She took out the photograph, the note, and a handful of letters. "These are what she left us. Not much, if you count the world the way your family counts. But to us, these were proof that she had not forgotten where she came from." Jonathan looked at the letters but did not touch them until Marian pushed them closer. "She sent money," Marian said. "When Annie needed school clothes. When my hours were cut. When the doctor changed my medication and insurance would not cover the new one. She never made a speech about helping. She never made me thank her twice." Jonathan closed his hand around one letter. Why did she never tell me? Marion's face held no anger now, only exhaustion. Because she was tired, Jonathan. He looked up. She was tired of walking into rooms where people measured her before they greeted her. Tired of hearing jokes with soft edges. Tired of being told she was sensitive when she noticed what was meant to wound her. Your family did not always shout. People like that rarely need to. They make the air cold, and then ask why you're shivering. Annie sat very still. Jonathan lowered his eyes. I should have seen it. Yes, Marion said. You should have. The room quieted. Marion continued. She loved you. Don't twist my words into something easier. She loved you deeply. But love did not make that house safe. Not for all of her. There were parts of Eleanor she kept outside the gate, and Annie and I were part of that. Jonathan covered his mouth with one hand, then dropped it. When she came to see you, before she died, she knew she was running out of time. She told me she was going away to rest. She was trying to rest. Marion's voice trembled once, then steadied. But she also came to say goodbye. Annie reached under the table and touched her mother's knee. Marion took the necklace from Annie and laid it on the table between them. She took this off right here. I told her not to. I told her it was from her husband and she should keep it. She said she had worn your love for years, but now she wanted Annie to carry a piece of hers. Jonathan looked at the necklace but did not reach for it. That restraint mattered. She said, Marion continued, if you ever saw it, maybe you would understand what she could not bring herself to confess. She said the name on the back would speak if she lost the courage. Jonathan's eyes reddened. She should not have had to be that afraid. No, Marion said. She should not have. For the first time, Annie heard no accusation in her mother's voice. Only the plain shape of truth. Jonathan leaned back, aged by the sentence. I thought I had lost a necklace. Then I thought I had lost an answer. Now I see I lost her trust, long before she died. Marion looked at him with the kind of pity that did not lower him. You lost the chance to protect what she hid, but you have not lost the chance to honor it. How? Start with Annie. Annie looked up quickly. Mama, no, Marion said gently. Let me say it. She turned to Jonathan. My daughter walked into your house to earn school money. She left accused, humiliated, and ordered to return with proof of her honesty. If you want to begin anywhere, begin there. Jonathan faced Annie fully. You should never have had to prove you did not steal before anyone proved you did. Annie held his gaze for a second, then looked at the table. People like me usually have to, sir. The sentence sat there heavier than the bills, heavier than the letters. Jonathan nodded slowly. Then I was part of something I claimed not to believe in. Marion pushed the necklace toward Annie. Put it away, baby. Annie took it, but before she could tuck it under her collar, Jonathan spoke. May I ask one thing? Marion's eyes narrowed. Ask. May I see the back once more? Annie hesitated, then turned the pendant over in her palm. He leaned forward, keeping his hands to himself. Eleanor's name caught the kitchen light. Jonathan did not touch it. He only read the name. Thank you, he said. That was the first time Annie believed he meant those two words. When he rose to leave, Marion stood as well. She walked him to the door, but did not offer forgiveness. Annie respected that. Forgiveness, like rent, could not be paid with one visit. At the doorway, Jonathan paused. Mrs. Carter, I would like to help with your medical care. Marion's face closed at once. He raised a hand, stopping himself before the offer became an insult. Not tonight. I hear you. I only mean that if there is a way to do it without taking your dignity, I would like to find it. Marion studied him. Then ask before you give. I will. And don't use Annie to pay a debt you owe the dead. Jonathan absorbed that too. I won't. After he left, Annie watched from the window as he sat in his car for a long time before starting the engine. Marion came to stand beside her. Do you believe him? Annie asked. I believe he loved my sister. That's not the same thing. No, Marion said. It isn't, but it is a place to start. Across town, Victoria Whitmore received a call from Mrs. Grace before Jonathan's car had even reached the main road. He went to them, Mrs. Grace said in a tight whisper, to that apartment. Victoria stood in Eleanor's old sitting room, one hand resting on the back of a chair. And He was there nearly an hour. Victoria's silence sharpened. Mrs. Grace lowered her voice. Miss Victoria, if those two come into this house, everything changes. Victoria looked at Eleanor's portrait on the wall, then at the empty place where the necklace used to sit in memory and rumor. No, Grace, she said, not everything. Not if we act before Jonathan forgets who his family is. She ended the call and stood alone in the quiet room, already deciding that Annie Carter would not be allowed to walk through the Whitmore door as anything more than a girl with a mop. The next morning, the Whitmore house moved with the quiet speed of people who had been warned without being told why. Mrs. Grace arrived before the kitchen lights were fully on. She checked the silver drawer twice, counted napkins, opened cabinets that did not need opening, then stood at the back window with her coffee cooling in her hand. Victoria came down at 7 in a pale gray dress, dressed as if she were attending a board meeting rather than breakfast. She did not greet the cook. She did not ask after the staff. She walked straight to Mrs. Grace. Has she come in? Not yet, Miss Victoria. She will. Mrs. Grace nodded. Mr. Whitmore told payroll to keep her active in the system. He did it himself. Victoria's mouth tightened. Of course he did. He has never done that for a new hire. He has never been handed a ghost in the shape of a cleaning girl before. Mrs. Grace lowered her voice. What do you want me to do? Victoria looked toward the main hall, where Eleanor's portrait could be seen through the open doorway. For now, nothing careless. Annie Carter is not to be mistreated in a way Jonathan can see. Mrs. Grace understood the words beneath the words. And when he cannot see, then you remember who has kept this house running since Eleanor died. Mrs. Grace looked down. Yes, ma'am. At 8, Annie arrived through the back entrance with her coat folded over one arm. She had slept little. Marion had insisted she eat toast before leaving, then stood at the door and said, "Go to work, not to war." Annie had almost laughed at that, because in the Whitmore house, work and war seemed to use the same hallway. Mrs. Grace waited beside the time clock. You're 2 minutes late. Annie looked at the clock. It's 7:58. Then don't waste the 2 minutes you were spared. Mrs. Grace handed her a list. Laundry first. Then the downstairs powder room. Then the East Hall. Do not go near the library, unless Mr. Whitmore calls for you. Do not speak to Miss Victoria, unless she speaks to you. And keep that necklace tucked away. We don't need another scene. Annie took the list. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Grace watched her closely. Your mother enjoyed the visit? Annie's grip tightened on the paper, but her voice stayed even. Mr. Whitmore came to speak with her. That's all. That is never all when rich men start apologizing. Annie met her eyes. My mother taught me not to discuss guests after they leave. For a moment, Mrs. Grace's face hardened, then she smiled without warmth. Go wash the sheets. In the laundry room, Annie sorted linens in silence. The machines thumped and spun, filling the small space with heat. She welcomed the noise. It gave her something to focus on besides Victoria's voice drifting from the front rooms and Mrs. Grace's steps passing too often outside the door. Near noon, Jonathan returned from his office earlier than expected. Annie heard the car in the drive, then the deeper sound of his shoes in the hall. She kept folding towels, not wanting to appear as if she had waited for him. A few minutes later, he appeared in the laundry doorway. Miss Carter. Annie turned. Mr. Whitmore. Mrs. Grace materialized behind him almost at once, carrying a basket with nothing in it. Sir, did you need something from the laundry? Jonathan did not turn. No, Grace. You may leave us. The housekeeper held the basket tighter. Of course, sir. She left, but slowly. Jonathan stepped inside, careful not to crowd Annie. I spoke to your mother last night. Yes, sir. She is a strong woman. She had to be. He accepted that quietly. I owe you another apology. Annie folded one towel, then another. You already apologized to Mama. I am speaking to you. She stopped folding. Jonathan looked tired, but not lost the way he had the day before. I accused you because I saw pain before I saw a person. That was wrong. Annie did not rush to comfort him. Yes, sir. I also let others speak over you. Yes, sir. He drew a slow breath. You don't make it easy for a man to feel forgiven. I didn't know that was my job. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Fair enough. For the first time, Annie felt the air loosen. Jonathan placed a small card on the folding table. "This is my direct office number. If anyone in this house treats you unfairly, you call it." Annie looked at the card but did not touch it. "Mrs. Grace won't like that." "No, she will not. Miss Victoria won't either." "I know. That won't stop them." Jonathan's face changed. He had expected thanks. Instead, Annie had given him truth. "No," he said. "It may not, but it will stop me from pretending I did not know." That answer reached her more than the card did. She picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. "Thank you." Jonathan turned to leave, then paused. "Your mother said you plan to attend college." "I plan to try." "Why only try?" "Because trying is free. Tuition isn't." He nodded once, as if the answer deserved more thought than a quick promise. "May I ask what you want to study?" Annie hesitated. "Law, maybe. Or social work. Something where people have to listen when someone poor says what happened." Jonathan stood very still. Before he could respond, Victoria's voice came from the hall. "Jonathan, the conference call is waiting." He looked back once at Annie. "We'll speak again." After he left, Mrs. Grace entered so quickly Annie knew she had been nearby. Her eyes dropped to Annie's pocket. "What did he give you?" "A number." "For what?" "In case I need to call him." Mrs. Grace set the empty basket down hard. "You would be wise not to mistake attention for protection. Mr. Whitmore has many moods. Miss Victoria has memory." Annie returned to folding. "So do I." Mrs. Grace stared at her for a beat, then walked out. By afternoon, Victoria sat in the small office off the west parlor with Thomas Blake on speakerphone. The door was closed, but not locked. Victoria never locked doors. She trusted fear more than keys. "She has his number now," Victoria said. Thomas gave a low laugh. "That sounds inconvenient, not fatal. You didn't see him. He went to that apartment. He let Marion Carter speak to him like an equal. Now he is asking about Annie's schooling." "Then we move faster." Victoria tapped one finger on the desk. "How?" "Make the girl unreliable. Not cruelly, not obviously. A missing item. A contradiction. Something that reminds Jonathan why staff should remain staff. He already caught the necklace." "No," Thomas said. "He found the necklace. He did not catch her stealing. That distinction is why she is still inside your house." Victoria looked toward the hallway. "Eleanor's bracelet is still in the upstairs case." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "The diamond one?" "Yes. That would be strong. It would be sacred. Even better." Victoria leaned back. "If it disappears, Jonathan will hurt. And hurt men often stop thinking." Victoria's eyes moved to the framed photograph of Eleanor on the side table. For years, she had hated how even dead, Eleanor could command the room without raising a hand. Now Eleanor's hidden family had returned through the servant entrance, carrying old letters and wounded pride, and Jonathan was beginning to bend toward them. Victoria would not allow that bend to become an open door. That evening, as Annie prepared to leave, Jonathan crossed the hall with a file in his hand. He stopped when he saw her near the back entrance. "Miss Carter." "Yes, sir?" "Would your mother allow me to send over the name of a doctor? Only the name. No appointment unless she chooses." Annie considered it. "I can ask." "That is enough." She nodded and stepped outside. For once, the walk to the bus stop felt less like escape. The card in her pocket pressed against her thigh. The necklace rested beneath her shirt. She still did not trust the house, not Mrs. Grace, not Victoria, not even Jonathan fully. But something had shifted. A door had opened just wide enough for air to pass through. Behind her, from an upstairs window, Victoria watched Annie leave. Mrs. Grace stood beside her. "She looks calmer today," Mrs. Grace said. Victoria's face did not change. "Then tomorrow we remind her where she is." Mrs. Grace turned. "Tomorrow?" Victoria lowered the curtain. "Tomorrow Eleanor's bracelet goes missing." The following morning began with unusual calm, the kind that often came before something unpleasant. Annie arrived a few minutes early, signed the attendance sheet, and started folding fresh towels in the laundry room. "Mrs. Grace barely acknowledged her, offering only a curt nod before disappearing upstairs with a basket of pressed linens. That silence worried Annie more than another argument would have. Nearly an hour passed before Mrs. Grace returned. Miss Victoria wants the master bedroom dusted, she said. Annie looked up in surprise. Yesterday you told me not to go upstairs. I did. And today? Today you're being told something different. Unless you've decided you only follow instructions you like. I'll do it. Mrs. Grace handed her a feather duster and a clean cloth. Don't touch anything you weren't told to touch. I won't. The second floor felt different from the rest of the house. The hallway was quieter, lined with family photographs and oil paintings collected over generations. Annie walked carefully, keeping one hand on the cleaning cart. She stopped outside the master bedroom. The door stood half open. She knocked lightly. No answer. She waited another moment before stepping inside. The room still carried traces of Eleanor's presence. Fresh flowers stood beside the window. Books remained neatly arranged on a shelf. A folded shawl rested across the arm of a chair. Nothing looked abandoned. It looked preserved. Annie worked slowly, dusting picture frames and wiping the windowsill exactly as Mrs. Grace had instructed. She deliberately avoided touching anything personal. When she finished, she pushed the cart toward the hallway. Before she could leave, Victoria entered. There you are. Annie stopped. You finished? Yes, ma'am. Victoria glanced around the room. So nothing unusual? No, ma'am. You didn't open any drawers? No. You didn't touch Mrs. Whitmore's jewelry cabinet? Annie frowned. I didn't even go near it. Victoria nodded without expression. Good. She stepped aside, allowing Annie to leave. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, but Annie felt uneasy all the way back downstairs. Less than 15 minutes later, the entire house exploded. Grace. Victoria's voice echoed from upstairs. Grace, come here immediately. Running footsteps filled the hallway. Mrs. Grace hurried past the kitchen. What happened, Miss Victoria? My bracelet. What bracelet? Eleanor's diamond bracelet. Silence. Then Victoria's voice became sharp. It's gone. Within seconds, every employee had stopped working. The cook came out of the kitchen. The gardener stepped inside through the back entrance. Two cleaning women exchanged nervous looks. Jonathan, who had been reviewing contracts in his office, appeared at the foot of the staircase. What happened? Victoria came down holding an open velvet jewelry box. The bracelet Eleanor always kept here. Jonathan looked inside. Empty. His expression hardened. I saw it yesterday, Victoria said. This morning it's gone. Mrs. Grace gasped dramatically. Oh, Lord. Jonathan spoke quietly. When was the cabinet opened? This morning. Who entered the bedroom? Victoria answered immediately. I did. Mrs. Grace nodded. So did I. Jonathan looked toward Annie. And Miss Carter? Mrs. Grace spoke before Annie could. She cleaned the bedroom less than half an hour ago. Every eye turned toward Annie. Her stomach dropped. I only dusted, she said. Victoria crossed her arms. Did you enter the room? Yes. Were you alone? Yes. Mrs. Grace let out a slow sigh. Sir, I truly hoped yesterday had been one terrible misunderstanding. Annie stared at her. Mrs. Grace continued gently, almost sadly. I defended hiring her. I accepted responsibility. I prayed I had judged her unfairly. You didn't defend me, Annie said quietly. Mrs. Grace ignored the interruption. But now another piece of Mrs. Whitmore's jewelry disappears after Miss Carter leaves the room. Jonathan remained silent. Victoria looked directly at Annie. Where's the bracelet? I don't know. You were the last person inside. I didn't take it. Mrs. Grace folded her hands. Miss Carter, if you made a mistake, now is the time. I didn't. Victoria took another step. Eleanor treasured that bracelet. I'm sorry it's missing. Sorry isn't an answer. Jonathan still had not spoken. His silence frightened Annie more than shouting. She looked toward him. Mr. Whitmore, he finally asked, did you touch the jewelry cabinet? No, sir. Did you open it? No. Did you see the bracelet? I never looked. Victoria shook her head. Jonathan, that's impossible. Annie looked at her. What do you mean? The cabinet sits beside the window. So, you were cleaning the windows. I cleaned around it. You expect us to believe you never noticed it? I wasn't looking for jewelry. Mrs. Grace sighed again. People usually notice beautiful things. Annie answered before thinking. I came here to notice dust. The sentence surprised even Jonathan. Victoria smiled faintly. Very clever. It isn't clever. No? Annie met her eyes. My mother taught me something. No one asked. She said if you're trusted to clean another person's house, You leave knowing less about their possessions than when you arrived. Jonathan looked at Annie again. The words sounded too natural to have been prepared. Victoria noticed the change immediately. She turned toward Mrs. Grace. Search the cleaning cart. Mrs. Grace nodded at once. Of course. Without asking Annie, she opened every compartment. Clean cloths, glass cleaner, furniture polish, extra trash bags. Nothing. Mrs. Grace frowned. The apron. Annie slowly untied it and handed it over. Mrs. Grace checked every pocket. Empty. Victoria remained calm. The locker. Annie's shoulders stiffened. My locker? Unless you object. I don't. Mrs. Grace led everyone toward the staff room. Jonathan followed several steps behind, saying nothing. The locker was opened. Inside sat Annie's folded sweater, her lunch container, a paperback college entrance guide, and the white handkerchief holding Eleanor's photograph and letters. Mrs. Grace searched everything. Nothing. She looked disappointed before she covered it with concern. I don't understand. Neither did Annie. Victoria closed the locker herself. New bracelet. Jonathan finally spoke. Then no accusation. Victoria looked at him. Jonathan. No. His voice was calm but firm. I will not accuse someone without evidence twice. The hallway became quiet. Mrs. Grace lowered her eyes. Of course, sir. Victoria forced a polite smile. As you wish. But Annie caught something in her expression. Disappointment. Not confusion. Disappointment. As everyone slowly returned to work, Annie gathered her lunch container and guidebook from the locker. Jonathan stopped beside her. I'm sorry. Annie looked up. For what? For making you stand through another search. She answered honestly. It wasn't the search that hurt. What was it? Nobody asked whether someone else had been in that room. Jonathan said nothing. Annie continued quietly. Everyone only wanted to know why I was there. Jonathan watched her for a long moment. Then he looked back toward the staircase where Victoria had disappeared. For the first time since Eleanor's death, a question entered his mind that he had never imagined asking. If Annie had not taken the bracelet, who wanted everyone to believe she had? Jonathan did not return to his office after the search. He stood in the staff hallway long after everyone else had gone back to work, listening to the house settle into its usual rhythm. Pots moved in the kitchen. A vacuum ran somewhere near the front rooms. Mrs. Grace spoke softly to one of the maids, too softly for him to catch the words. For years, he had mistaken that kind of order for peace. Now it sounded rehearsed. He went upstairs alone. Victoria was in Eleanor's old sitting room, holding the empty velvet case in her lap. She did not seem startled when he entered. If anything, she looked prepared. Jonathan, she said carefully gentle. I know you don't want to hear this. Then don't say it. She closed the case. You cannot let guilt blind you. Guilt? Yes. Over Eleanor. Over whatever that girl and her mother have told you. I understand it. Truly. I do. But there is a difference between compassion and foolishness. Jonathan looked around the room. Eleanor's books still lined one wall. Her favorite chair sat near the window. Victoria had changed the curtains after Eleanor died, but he had never noticed until that moment. Eleanor would not have chosen gray. Who else entered the bedroom this morning? He asked. Victoria's expression barely moved. I already told you. Grace, me, and Annie. In what order? Does it matter? It does to me. She set the case on the table. Grace went in to open the windows. I checked the room before a call. Annie cleaned it. After that, I noticed the bracelet was gone. Did you notice it before Annie entered? Victoria paused half a beat too long. I saw it yesterday. That is not what I asked. Her voice cooled. Jonathan, are you questioning me? I am questioning the sequence. You sound like a lawyer. No. Thomas sounds like a lawyer. I sound like a man whose house keeps producing accusations against the same girl. Victoria rose. Because the same girl keeps appearing near Eleanor's things, or because someone keeps placing Eleanor's things near her. The words changed the room. Victoria's eyes narrowed. That is ugly. Yes, Jonathan said. It is. You think I would use Eleanor's memory that way? I think I have spent years assuming people would not do things simply because I did not want to believe them capable. Victoria took a step back. This is what I mean. She has been here 2 days, Jonathan. 2 days. And already you are suspicious of family. Family should survive questions. Her lips pressed together. Call Thomas. He'll tell you to be careful. I intend to call someone else first. Who? The security company. Victoria's face shifted, quick as a shadow passing across a wall. The upstairs cameras haven't worked properly in years. I never said upstairs. Jonathan left before she could answer. Downstairs, Annie was back in the laundry room, folding tablecloths with more care than the task required. Work gave her hands somewhere to put the fear. Every time someone passed the door, her shoulders tightened. She kept hearing Mrs. Grace's voice. If you made a mistake, now is the time. She had not made a mistake. But in that house, innocence seemed to need more proof than guilt. Jonathan appeared at the doorway near mid-afternoon. Miss Carter. She set down the tablecloth. Yes, sir. I'm going to ask you something. You may say no. That alone made her look up. I need you to walk me through what you did in the bedroom this morning. Not because I doubt you, because details matter. Annie studied his face. You believe me? I believe I do not have evidence against you, and I believe the search should not have happened the way it did. That was not perfect. It was better than before. I dusted the dresser, Annie said, then the windowsill. I wiped the table near the chair. I did not open drawers. I did not touch the jewelry cabinet. Miss Victoria came in before I left. Jonathan's attention sharpened. She came in while you were still there? Yes, sir. She asked if anything was unusual. Annie nodded. She asked if I opened drawers. She asked if I touched the cabinet. Jonathan was quiet. What? Annie asked. She asked the questions before the bracelet was reported missing. Annie had not thought of that. When she did, her stomach tightened. A voice came from behind him. Mr. Whitmore. Mrs. Grace stood with folded linens in her arms. Miss Victoria is asking for you. Jonathan did not turn right away. Tell her I will come when I am finished. Mrs. Grace's eyes moved to Annie. Of course. After she left, Jonathan lowered his voice. Do not discuss this with anyone. I don't discuss much in this house. A sad, almost smile crossed his face. No. I imagine you don't. He left her there, but the question he had planted remained. Victoria had asked about the cabinet before she announced the bracelet was gone. Annie finished the linen slowly. At 4, Jonathan sat in his private study with a man named Caleb Price, head of the security company that had serviced the Whitmore property for 15 years. Caleb was in his 60s, with a careful manner and the calm of someone who had learned to speak to rich people without being swallowed by them. I need access to all camera records from the past 72 hours, Jonathan said. Caleb glanced toward the closed door. All of them? All. Including the old auxiliary system. Jonathan leaned back. That still works? Caleb looked surprised. You had us maintain it every year, sir. Mrs. Whitmore's hallway, the Upper East Corridor, rear service entrance, archive room, separate storage. You requested that after her passing. Jonathan remembered none of the yearly approvals. Thomas or Victoria had placed papers in front of him. He had signed most things without reading when grief was at its worst. Can footage be deleted? From the main system, yes. If someone has admin access. From the auxiliary backup, not easily. It mirrors to an external drive and a locked cloud account. Who has access? You, me, and the attorney of record. Thomas Blake. Yes, sir. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Pull the footage. Quietly. Caleb nodded. Do you suspect a break-in? Jonathan looked toward the hallway. No, something worse. That evening, Annie came home with tired feet and a head full of questions. Marion was sitting by the window, mending a loose button on one of Annie's work shirts. How was it? Annie dropped her bag on the chair. The bracelet went missing. Marion's needle stopped. What bracelet? One of Aunt Eleanor's. They searched my cart, my apron, my locker. Marion closed her eyes. Lord help us. They didn't find it. Of course they didn't. Mr. Whitmore didn't accuse me this time. Marion opened her eyes. That is not the same as protecting you. I know, but he asked questions after, real ones. Marion resumed sewing, though her hands were slower now. Be careful with men learning goodness late. Sometimes they want applause for reaching the starting line. Annie sat down across from her. Do you think he's trying? Yes. Do you think it matters? Marion tied off the thread. It matters if trying becomes doing. Across town, Victoria stood in Thomas Blake's office, no longer calm. You told me the bracelet would be enough, she said. Thomas poured himself coffee from a silver pot. It would have been if Grace had found it. She didn't, because someone moved it too soon or hid it too well. Victoria glared. Do not blame me. I'm not blaming you. I'm telling you the plan was incomplete. Jonathan is asking about cameras. Thomas stopped pouring. Which cameras? He mentioned the security company. Thomas set down the pot. Did he say auxiliary? No, but he might know. Victoria looked toward the window. Can you handle it? Thomas did not answer as quickly as she wanted. Thomas, I can handle the main system. The auxiliary may be more complicated. Then make it simple. His voice hardened. Careful, Victoria. Panic is noisy. She moved closer. And prison is quiet. Fix it. For the first time, Thomas looked uneasy. Back at the Whitmore house, Jonathan stayed in his study after midnight, waiting for Caleb's call. Eleanor's photograph sat on his desk. Beside it lay a blank sheet of paper where he had written 3 names. Annie Carter, Marion Carter, Eleanor Whitmore. He had spent years thinking grief was the heaviest thing a man could carry. He was beginning to understand that guilt. Once it found a door, entered with both hands full. At 12:17 a.m., his phone rang. Caleb's voice was low. Mr. Whitmore, I found something. Jonathan sat upright. The bracelet? No, sir, not yet. Then what? A file request was made yesterday evening from Mr. Blake's office. Someone tried to access the auxiliary records covering Mrs. Whitmore's hallway. Jonathan looked at Eleanor's photograph. Were they successful? No, sir, but they tried twice. Jonathan closed his eyes. When he opened them, the room felt different. The question was no longer whether Annie had taken anything. The question was why Thomas Blake wanted to see what the old cameras had seen. Jonathan did not sleep after Caleb's call. He sat in the study until the sky outside the windows turned from black to a thin gray, with Eleanor's photograph on the desk and the phone still in his hand. A file request from Thomas Blake's office could have been explained in many ways. A lawyer reviewed records. A lawyer protected the family. A lawyer checked facts before advising a client. But Thomas had not called him. Thomas had not asked. Thomas had tried to reach the old camera system in silence, less than a day after Eleanor's bracelet disappeared and Annie Carter was searched in front of half the staff. At 6:30, Jonathan called Caleb back. I want the footage pulled before anyone else knows. I can be there within the hour, Caleb said. No, send it to me through the secure link. Then come at noon and bring whatever device you need to preserve it. Yes, sir. And Caleb? Yes? If Thomas Blake calls, you have not spoken to me. A pause. Understood. Jonathan ended the call and looked at Eleanor's photograph. What did I let happen in this house? He said quietly. The house answered with silence. By 8, Victoria was already downstairs. She had dressed carefully again, this time in deep blue, the color she wore when she wanted to seem calm. Mrs. Grace stood near the dining room with a tray of coffee, pretending not to wait for instructions. Has Jonathan come down? Victoria asked. No, Mo. Did he leave the study last night? I don't know. Victoria looked at her. Mrs. Grace lowered her eyes. Not that I saw. That is not the same answer. No, Ma. Victoria took one cup from the tray and left the other untouched. Watch Annie today. Not loudly. Not foolishly. If Jonathan is beginning to suspect us, I want no scene. Mrs. Grace stiffened at the word us. Victoria noticed. Do not grow a conscience now, Grace. It would be badly timed. I only did what you asked. You did what kept your position secure. Mrs. Grace's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. At the back entrance, Annie arrived with her bag close to her side and the necklace tucked beneath her shirt. She had thought about staying home. Marion had told her she could, but if Annie stayed away, Victoria would win without speaking another word. So she came. Mrs. Grace met her by the time clock. Laundry, she said. That's all? For now. Annie signed in. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Grace watched her carefully. You look tired. I slept enough. Guilt keeps people awake. Annie looked at her then. Not angry, not afraid, just clear. Then you must be exhausted. Mrs. Grace's face hardened. Careful, girl. Annie stepped past her. I'm here to work. In the laundry room, the machines were already running. Annie sorted towels, checked tags, and folded napkins in clean stacks. Work steadied her, but the house felt different. Every footstep outside the door seemed to pause a second too long. Every quiet conversation ended when she passed. Near mid-morning, Jonathan appeared. Miss Carter. Annie turned. Mr. Whitmore, may I speak with you? She glanced toward the hall. Here? In the study. Her hands tightened around a towel. Am I being accused again? No. The answer came quickly enough that she believed he meant it. She followed him through the hall. Mrs. Grace saw them pass and took one step forward, but Jonathan spoke without looking at her. Grace, do not follow us. The housekeeper stopped. In the study, Caleb Price stood beside Jonathan's desk with a laptop open. He nodded to Annie with simple respect, the way a person nods to another person, not to a uniform. Jonathan closed the door. Annie stood near the chair but did not sit. Jonathan noticed. Please sit if you want to. I'll stand. He accepted it. Caleb has been reviewing old security records. Annie's mouth went dry. From yesterday? And from the night before. Caleb turned the laptop slightly, but Jonathan raised a hand. Before I show you anything, I want you to know something. You were right. Yesterday. Annie said nothing. No one asked who else had reason to place blame on you. No one asked why Victoria seemed ready with questions before the bracelet was found missing. No one asked why Mrs. Grace looked more relieved by suspicion than disturbed by it. Annie's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. People don't ask questions when the answer they want is already standing there. Jonathan looked at her, and this time he did not flinch from the truth. I know. Caleb cleared his throat. Sir, the clip is ready. Jonathan nodded. The video opened with a narrow view of the upstairs east corridor. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. The hall was dim, but clear enough. A figure entered from the right. Thomas Blake. He wore a dark coat and moved with the confidence of someone who knew the house. He stopped outside Eleanor's old room, looked once down the hall, then went in. Annie felt her pulse in her fingertips. Seconds passed. Then Victoria appeared. She did not enter the room. She stood at the end of the corridor, phone in hand, watching. Annie whispered. She was there. Jonathan's face went hard, not with rage this time, but with a controlled disgust. The screen showed Thomas leaving the room several minutes later. His hand was closed around something small. Victoria spoke to him. No audio. Thomas nodded, then walked toward the service stairs. Caleb paused the video. There's more. The next clip showed the service hallway near the laundry wing. Thomas entered, opened the small supply closet, and placed something behind a box of cleaning cloths. He shut the door and left. Annie looked at Jonathan. They put it near the laundry. Yes, Jonathan said. Why didn't Mrs. Grace find it yesterday? Caleb answered. Because someone removed it before the search reached that closet. He played the next clip. At 7:13 a.m., Mrs. Grace entered the service hallway. She opened the supply closet, reached behind the box, and took out the bracelet. She slipped it into her apron pocket. Annie stood very still. Mrs. Grace had not merely joined the accusation. She had helped shape it. Jonathan turned away from the screen for a moment, one hand on the desk. I am sorry, he said. Annie did not know whether the words were for her, for Eleanor, or for the years he had trusted the wrong people. Maybe all of them. What happens now? She asked. Jonathan faced her again. Now we do not move too fast. Annie blinked. You have the video. I have part of the truth. Thomas tried to access this system last night. That means he knows there may be records. If I confront him now, he will protect himself. Victoria will claim grief, panic, misunderstanding. Grace will say she was obeying someone else. I want the whole matter, not the corner they choose to give me. Caleb closed the laptop. There may be financial records tied to this. Jonathan nodded. The Eleanor Foundation. Annie remembered Marion's voice from the night before. She never made me thank her twice. What about my name? Annie asked. Jonathan went quiet. My name was dragged through your house twice. Yesterday, people searched my locker. Mrs. Grace spoke about me like I was dirt under her shoe. You say you want the whole truth. I understand that, but I have to keep walking through those halls while you wait. That stopped him. You're right, he said. You should not have to. What are you going to do? Jonathan picked up the phone on his desk and pressed a button. Victoria, Grace, and Mr. Blake are not to give instructions to Miss Carter. Effective immediately, she reports only to me or to payroll for scheduling. Have that written and circulated to staff within the hour. A voice answered faintly, Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Annie watched him hang up. It won't make them like me, she said. No, Jonathan replied, but it will make it harder for them to corner you. Caleb gathered his laptop. I'll preserve the files and send copies to the external counsel you requested. Thank you. After Caleb left, Annie remained near the chair. Jonathan looked at the closed door. There is another thing. I would like your mother to stay away from this house until I know what I am dealing with. Annie nodded at once. She wouldn't want to come anyway. I will visit her if she permits, or call, on her terms. That matters. I'm learning. Annie looked at the desk. Eleanor's photograph stood beside a stack of papers. Did Aunt Eleanor know? Know what? That people around you could do things like this. Jonathan's answer came slowly. I think she knew more than I wanted to see. Outside the study, Victoria read the new staff instruction in silence. Mrs. Grace stood beside her, color drained from her face. She reports only to him now, Mrs. Grace whispered. Victoria folded the paper once, then again. Then he knows something. What do we do? Victoria looked toward the study door. Her voice stayed low. We call Thomas before Jonathan calls someone worse. But when Thomas Blake's phone rang in his downtown office, he did not answer. He was already standing in front of a filing cabinet, removing folders marked Eleanor Foundation, and for the first time in years, his hands were not steady. Thomas Blake did not answer Victoria's call, because he already knew why she was calling. His office door was locked, the blinds were lowered, and 3 folders lay open across his desk. Eleanor Foundation, Community Education Grant, Outreach Consulting. Names clean enough to sit in a charity report, numbers dirty enough to ruin him. He had told himself for years that it was temporary. A transfer here, a consulting fee there. Money borrowed from a foundation Jonathan barely reviewed. Victoria had called it management. Thomas had called it compensation. Neither of them had called it theft, because theft was a word used for people who broke windows, not people who wore tailored suits and signed documents with fountain pens. Now the word sat in the room with him. His phone rang again. Victoria. He let it ring until it stopped. Then he gathered the folders, slid them into a leather case, and opened his laptop. The attempt to access the old camera records had failed twice. Caleb Price had always been careful, but Thomas had underestimated how loyal old professionals could be when they were treated with respect over many years. Jonathan had kept better people around him than he deserved. The phone rang a third time. Thomas answered. Victoria's voice came through tight and low. Where have you been? Boozy. He knows something. I assumed. He changed Annie Carter's reporting line. She answers only to him now. Thomas sat back. That means he has footage. Can it be destroyed? No. Thomas. I said no, not without making it worse. If he has the auxiliary files, there will be backups. Victoria said nothing for a moment. Then we need to control the meaning of what he saw. Meaning? You entered the room to check the bracelet after I asked you to. Grace moved it because she was worried. No crime. No plot. Confusion. Thomas let out a flat laugh. That may work for a bracelet. It will not work for the foundation. Victoria's breath caught. What foundation? Do not play that game with me. I'm asking what Jonathan knows. I don't know what he knows. That is the problem. Across town, Annie was in the laundry room, trying to finish her shift under the weight of a new kind of silence. People no longer accused her openly. That should have been easier. It was not. Their quiet now carried calculation. The cook gave her a quick nod, then looked away. The gardener asked if she needed the back door held open, then seemed embarrassed for being kind. Everyone had heard the new instruction from Jonathan. No one knew what it meant. Mrs. Grace had avoided her since morning. Near 4 o'clock, Jonathan called Annie into the study again. Caleb was gone. A woman Annie had not seen before sat at the desk with a legal pad and a slim briefcase. She was in her late 50s, black, with silver at her temples and a manner that filled the room without trying. Jonathan introduced her. This is Denise Holloway. She is independent counsel. She does not work for Thomas Blake. Denise stood and offered Annie her hand. Miss Carter. Annie shook it. Ma'am, I understand you were accused of taking jewelry from this house twice. Annie glanced at Jonathan. Denise noticed. You may answer without protecting Mr. Whitmore's feelings. Jonathan lowered his eyes, accepting the rebuke. Yes, ma'am, Annie said. Twice. Were police called? No. Were you searched? My cart, my apron, and my locker. By whom? Mrs. Grace. Miss Victoria told her to. Denise wrote that down. Were you told you could refuse? No, Mo. Were you afraid refusing would cost you your job? Annie almost said no out of habit, then stopped. Yes. Denise looked up. Thank you for telling the truth plainly. Annie did not know why that simple sentence made her shoulders loosen. Jonathan spoke. Denise will review the foundation records and the internal handling of the accusation. Denise closed her folder. Not just review. Preserve. There is a difference. Annie looked between them. What does that mean? It means, Denise said, when powerful people have done something wrong, papers sometimes go missing. Memories improve or worsen depending on who is asking. We will not be relying on memory. Jonathan nodded. I want your mother protected from this. Denise turned to him. Then stop saying protected when you mean hidden. Mrs. Carter may have information. She should decide what she wishes to share. Annie liked her immediately. Jonathan accepted that too. You're right. Denise looked back at Annie. Would your mother speak with me? I can ask. That is all I need. Before Annie left, Jonathan said, Miss Carter. She paused near the door. I am going to make a public correction inside this house tomorrow, to staff, about the accusations. Annie's throat tightened. Why tomorrow? Because I should have done it today. She nodded once and left. That evening, Victoria arrived at Thomas Blake's office through the private entrance. He was waiting with a glass of water untouched beside him. You brought the files? She asked. Some. Some? The ones that look worst. Victoria closed the door. We need a plan. We need distance. Her eyes narrowed. From what? From each other, if necessary. She stared at him. Do not even think about sacrificing me. Thomas stood. Victoria, the bracelet was reckless. Involving Grace was reckless. Accessing the auxiliary system from my office was beyond reckless. You told me to make the girl unreliable. I did not tell you to use a hallway with cameras you did not understand. You knew about the old system. I knew it existed. I did not know Jonathan had maintained it. Victoria walked to the window, then back. He won't expose this. Not if it damages the Whitmore name. Thomas shook his head. You still think this is about the family name. It is not. He saw Eleanor's handwriting in that girl's hands. Men like Jonathan can ignore numbers. They cannot ignore ghosts. Victoria looked toward the folders. How much? Thomas did not answer. How much, Thomas? He removed a page and handed it to her. Victoria read the total, and for the first time that week, her face lost its polish. This cannot be right. It is right. That much went through the foundation? Over years, through vendors, events, consulting retainers, scholarship administration, outreach programs that never happened. You signed off too. So did you. She lowered the paper. Jonathan barely cared about the foundation. That was before Annie Carter wore Eleanor's necklace into his hallway. Victoria pressed both hands to the desk. Then we make him care about something else. What? His competence. Thomas watched her carefully. He has been unstable since Eleanor died, Victoria said. Everyone knows it. Reclusive. Distracted. Signing documents without review. Now he is taking advice from a cleaning girl and her sick mother. We do not fight the evidence first. We fight his judgment. Thomas was silent too long. Victoria leaned closer. Can it be done? With the right affidavits, staff statements, medical notes framed carefully, board concern. Good. It is dangerous. So is prison. Thomas looked at the foundation folders, then at her. If we go after his competence, there is no turning back. Victoria's voice dropped. There was no turning back the moment that necklace hit the floor. At the Carter apartment, Marion listened while Annie described Denise Holloway and the planned correction. She sat near the window with the blue tin on her lap. "A black woman lawyer?" Marion asked. "Yes." "Good. You'll talk to her?" Marion ran her thumb over one of Eleanor's letters. "I will. But I want you there." "Of course." Marion looked tired, but steadier than before. "Your aunt used to say truth is like water under a door. You can hold it back with towels for a while. But if enough of it gathers, it finds the room." Annie touched the necklace beneath her shirt. "Do you think Aunt Eleanor wanted this?" "I think she wanted peace," Marion said. "But peace without truth is just quiet with better manners." The next morning, Jonathan gathered the household in the main hall. Annie stood near the back, not beside the staff, and not beside the family, caught somewhere between. Victoria entered last, dressed for dignity. Mrs. Grace stood near her, pale and stiff. Jonathan faced them all. "Yesterday," he began, "Miss Annie Carter was subjected to suspicion and a search in this house. The day before, I myself accused her wrongly regarding a necklace that belonged to my late wife. I am correcting that now. There is no evidence Miss Carter stole anything. There is evidence that she was treated unfairly. That will not continue." The staff shifted uneasily. Mrs. Grace kept her eyes down. Victoria stepped forward. "Jonathan, perhaps this is better handled privately." "No," he said. "The accusation was not private." Annie felt every eye turned toward her, but this time the weight was different. Not easy, not comfortable, but different. Jonathan continued. "From this point forward, any concern involving staff conduct will go through written procedure, not whispers, not assumptions, not humiliation." Victoria's face tightened. Then the front door opened. Thomas Blake entered with 2 board members and a physician Annie had never seen. Jonathan turned. "Thomas?" Thomas removed his gloves slowly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Jonathan, but the board has concerns." Victoria did not look surprised. Annie understood then. The bracelet had failed. The search had failed. Now they were not trying to prove she was guilty. They were trying to prove Jonathan could no longer be trusted. Jonathan looked from Thomas Blake to the 2 board members behind him, then to the physician standing near the door with a leather folder under one arm. The staff remained gathered in the hall. No one moved. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped. "What concerns?" Jonathan asked. Thomas gave him the kind of careful expression lawyers use when they want a knife to look like a bandage. "Your health, Jonathan. Your judgment. Recent decisions have raised questions." Victoria stepped forward. "Calm now. Too calm. No one wants to embarrass you." Jonathan turned to her. "Then you chose a strange room." One of the board members, a thin man named Robert Hales, cleared his throat. "Jonathan, perhaps we should move this into the study." "No," Jonathan said. "You walked in during a staff meeting. Speak where you entered." Annie stood near the back with her hands folded in front of her. She felt the shift in the air. A moment ago, Jonathan had been correcting a wrong. Now the room was being turned against him. Thomas glanced toward Annie, then back to Jonathan. "Since Mrs. Whitmore's passing, you have understandably withdrawn from daily oversight. Recently you have made sudden changes to staff authority, requested old security files, questioned family members, and involved outside counsel without notifying the board." Denise Holloway, who had entered quietly through the side hall, spoke before Jonathan could. "Outside counsel was retained properly." Thomas's mouth tightened. "Miss Holloway, this is a family matter." "No," Denise said. "It became a legal matter the moment an employee was searched without procedure, and a foundation's records showed irregularities." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "Irregularities? That is a serious word to throw around in front of staff." "It is a serious thing to find in a charity ledger," Denise replied. The physician shifted uneasily. He clearly had not expected an audience. Jonathan looked at him. "Dr. Mercer, why are you here?" The doctor adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Blake asked me to be available, in case a wellness evaluation became necessary." "A wellness evaluation?" Jonathan repeated. Thomas lifted both hands slightly. "No one is saying you are unwell. We are saying grief can impair decision-making. You have become emotionally entangled with a young employee and her mother because of a necklace tied to your late wife." Annie felt the words strike the room. Young employee. Her mother. A necklace. He made their lives sound like symptoms. Jonathan's face stayed controlled. Emotionally entangled, Victoria took over. You went to North Charleston alone. You brought legal counsel into the house. You changed staff procedures overnight. You are treating Annie Carter as if she has some claim on Eleanor's memory that the rest of us do not. Annie raised her head. She wanted to speak, but Marion's voice held her back. Truth does not need to shout every time someone pokes it. Jonathan saw the effort in her face. Miss Carter, you do not have to stand here for this. Thomas answered too quickly. Actually, she should, since much of this concerns her influence. Denise turned to him. Careful. No, Annie said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She stepped forward just enough to be heard. I don't have influence here. Yesterday, I couldn't even stop someone from searching my lunchbox. A few staff members lowered their eyes. Annie continued, voice steady. Mr. Whitmore didn't start asking questions because I told him to. He started because the questions were already there. Thomas smiled without warmth. That is a practiced answer. No, sir. It's a tired one. The hall went silent. Jonathan's gaze remained on Thomas. You mentioned old security files. How did you know I requested them? Thomas paused. You just said so. No, you said it before I did. Victoria's jaw tightened. Denise looked down at her notes, then up again. Mr. Blake, did you attempt to access the auxiliary security system 2 nights ago? Thomas blinked once. As attorney of record, I have authority to review family security material. That was not the question. Robert Hales took a half step back. Jonathan spoke calmly. Answer her. Thomas adjusted his cuff. Yes. I attempted access. Why? Jonathan asked. To protect you from making accusations based on partial information. Before you knew what information I had? Thomas did not answer. Jonathan let the silence work. He had spent many years filling silence with money, with signatures, with other people's assurances. Now he let it sit in the hall. Until even Mrs. Grace looked uncomfortable. Then Jonathan said, Caleb Price preserved the footage. Victoria's face went pale beneath her makeup. Mrs. Grace made a small sound. Thomas recovered first. Footage can be misunderstood. Then we will understand it together. Jonathan turned toward the staff member nearest the media panel. Bring the screen into the hall. Victoria stepped forward. Jonathan, don't do this. He looked at her. You brought the board into my hallway. I am simply providing them the meeting materials. Denise almost smiled. The portable screen was brought from the conference room. Caleb Price arrived 5 minutes later carrying a small drive. Jonathan had called him earlier, anticipating exactly this kind of move, though Annie had not known it. Thomas watched Caleb set up the file. I object to this being shown without context. Denise answered, Your objection is noted in a hallway. The first clip played. The Upper East corridor appeared, dim but clear. Thomas entered Eleanor's old room late at night. Victoria appeared moments later at the end of the hall. She waited. Thomas came out with his hand closed around something small. A murmur moved through the staff. The second clip showed Thomas in the service hallway placing something in the supply closet near the laundry room. Mrs. Grace's hands gripped her apron. The third clip showed Mrs. Grace removing the item early the next morning. Jonathan stopped the video there. No one spoke. Thomas's face had gone hard. That does not prove theft. No, Jonathan said. It proves a plan. Victoria's voice came out low. You are humiliating this family. Jonathan turned to her. No. I am ending the practice. Mrs. Grace broke first. I didn't know what it was for. Victoria snapped. Grace. Mrs. Grace's eyes darted from Victoria to Jonathan, then to Annie. Fear had stripped the false sorrow from her face. Miss Victoria said the bracelet needed to be moved. She said Mr. Blake would handle it. She said the girl had to be taught not to reach above herself. Annie did not move, but the words entered her like cold water. Victoria's face changed completely. You lying old fool. Mrs. Grace stepped back. I served this house 30 years, and you will leave it with nothing if you keep talking. Jonathan's voice cut in. Enough. Dr. Mercer closed his folder. Mr. Whitmore, I was clearly brought here under incomplete circumstances. Thomas turned on him. Doctor, I will not be used in a family dispute dressed up as medical concern. The doctor looked at Jonathan. I apologize. Jonathan nodded once. Robert Hales cleared his throat again, this time smaller. Jonathan, perhaps the board should reconvene after reviewing the foundation records. Yes, Denise said. You should. Thomas looked at her. You have no authority over the board. No, Denise replied. But federal reporting rules have authority over charitable foundations, and those records are already being preserved. That landed harder than the video. Victoria stared at Jonathan. You would expose Eleanor's foundation? Jonathan's voice lowered. Eleanor's foundation was created to help people your family preferred not to see. If money was taken from it, then hiding that would insult her more than any public shame could. Your family, Victoria repeated, bitter now. Listen to yourself. They have turned you against your own blood. Jonathan looked at Annie, then back at Victoria. Blood did not teach you decency. The words ended whatever room Victoria thought she still controlled. Thomas gathered his coat. I advise everyone to stop speaking until counsel is present. Denise lifted one eyebrow. I am counsel. Your counsel, he said. Independent counsel, she corrected. That difference seems to bother you. Thomas moved toward the door, but Caleb stepped aside only after Jonathan nodded. There would be no handcuffs today. No final punishment. Not yet. Jonathan wanted everything tied down. Footage, ledgers, statements, transfers, signatures. He had learned, too late but not too late to act, that power without proof could become another kind of cruelty. Victoria followed Thomas to the door. But before leaving, she turned to Annie. This is not over. Annie felt every person in the hall waiting for her to shrink. She did not. No, ma'am, she said. I don't think it is. Victoria's mouth tightened. Then she left. One by one, the staff dispersed. Some avoided Annie's eyes. Others gave small looks of apology. They did not have the courage to speak. Mrs. Grace remained where she was, smaller now without Victoria beside her. Miss Carter, she began. Annie looked at her. Don't. The old woman closed her mouth. Jonathan turned to Annie. You should go home. I still have 3 hours on my shift. You don't need to finish it. Annie looked at the mop near the wall, then at the staff hallway, then at him. If I leave every time someone tries to shame me, I'll spend my whole life walking out of rooms I have a right to stand in. Jonathan absorbed that. Then what do you want? To finish my work. And then go home on my own feet. He nodded slowly. All right. Denise watched Annie with quiet approval. I'll call your mother this evening, if she agrees. She will, Annie said. She'll want to know what happened. Jonathan looked tired again. But it was a different tiredness now. The tiredness of a man finally lifting what he should have carried years ago. As Annie returned to the laundry room, the house no longer felt powerful in the same way. The portraits still hung. The staircase still rose. The rooms were still wide and expensive, but something had cracked where everyone could hear it. That afternoon, Annie folded towels, matched pillowcases, and wiped the same counters Mrs. Grace had once used to look down on her. She did the work carefully, not because the house deserved it, but because her mother had taught her that dignity was not proven by the work you did. It was proven by what you refused to let the work take from you. In the study, Jonathan and Denise opened the first full ledger of the Eleanor Foundation. By the 3rd page, Denise stopped making notes. By the 7th, Jonathan stood and walked to the window. By the 10th, he understood the bracelet had only been a distraction. Someone had been stealing from Eleanor's name for years. Denise Holloway read the ledger in silence. Jonathan stood by the window with one hand against the frame, not looking outside so much as refusing to look at the papers for one more second. Annie had gone back to the laundry room. The staff had scattered, and the house had settled into a nervous quiet, but the study felt louder than it had all morning. Denise turned another page. There are 7 vendors here that don't appear to have real addresses. Jonathan did not turn. How much? I don't want to guess from partial records. How much, Denise? She looked at the total column again. At least 4 million, over 6 years. Possibly more. The number did not make Jonathan move. It made him stiller. That foundation was created in Eleanor's name, he said. Yes. For scholarships, medical grants, community programs. Yes. And I signed these reports. Denise paused. Your signature appears on annual approvals. Thomas prepared them. Victoria countersigned several disbursement authorizations. I signed what they put in front of me. That may explain it. It does not erase it. I know. He finally turned from the window. His face had lost the fury from the hallway. What remained was worse. Shame had settled into him, deep and plain. Denise closed one folder and opened another. We need outside forensic accountants. Not one of your usual firms. Someone Thomas has never used. Hire them, and we need to preserve every email, bank record, grant application, board packet, vendor invoice, and payment authorization related to the foundation. Do it. You also need to prepare for Victoria and Thomas to move first. They tried to question your judgment today. They may file something formal. Jonathan looked toward the door. Let them. No, Denise said. Do not make this about pride. Pride is how families like yours turn legal problems into generational disasters. He accepted the correction. What should I do? Document everything. Say little. Trust fewer people. And decide whether you are protecting the Whitmore name or Eleanor's. That answer came without hesitation. Eleanor's. Then it may cost the Whitmore name. It should. Denise studied him for a moment. Good. Then we can work. By the time Annie finished her shift, the sun had moved low across the back lawn. She washed her hands in the laundry sink until the smell of detergent faded, then dried them on a paper towel. Her body wanted home. Her mind stayed in the hallway, replaying Mrs. Grace's confession, Victoria's threat, Thomas's smooth voice, Jonathan's public correction. She had not been saved. Not completely, but for the first time in that house, the lie had not been allowed to finish its meal. As she reached the staff exit, Jonathan was waiting near the service hall. He held no papers, no phone, no order in his hand. Miss Carter, he said. Annie stopped. Yes, sir? I want to tell you what Denise and I found. You don't have to. I think I do. She waited. Money has been taken from Eleanor's foundation. A great deal of it, over years. Annie's face changed slowly. The foundation that was supposed to help people? Yes. People like the ones Aunt Eleanor helped? Yes. Annie looked down the hall toward the framed family photographs. So they stole from her twice. Jonathan's brow tightened. Twice? First, they made her feel like she had to hide who she loved. Then they used her name to take from people she would have helped. Jonathan had no answer. There was none large enough. Annie adjusted the strap of her bag. Does my mother need to know? I think she deserves to. I'll tell her before Miss Holloway calls. Jonathan nodded. Thank you. Annie almost left, then turned back. Mr. Whitmore? Yes? Don't let them make this about me. He understood. It started because of you. No, it started before I was born. I just carried something into the room that made people stop pretending. Jonathan looked at the necklace beneath the collar of her uniform, though only the chain was visible. You are right. Annie left through the back door. That evening, Marion listened without interrupting while Annie told her everything. She sat at the kitchen table, one hand resting on the blue tin, the other wrapped around a folded dish towel. When Annie described the video of Thomas and Victoria, Marion closed her eyes. When Annie told her Mrs. Grace had helped move the bracelet, she shook her head once, more tired than surprised. But when Annie told her about the money missing from Eleanor's foundation, Marion opened her eyes and kept them open. How much? She asked. Mr. Whitmore didn't say exactly. He said a great deal. Marion leaned back. Eleanor sent $20 once and apologized because it was not more. $20. She wrote me 3 lines, explaining how she wished she could do better without making trouble, and those people were taking money in her name. Annie set the kettle on the stove. Miss Holloway wants to speak with you. She can call tonight. You sure? Yes. Marion's voice sharpened. I was quiet for Eleanor because she asked me to be. I will not be quiet for people who stole from what she left behind. Annie turned on the burner. Mama, are you angry with her? With Eleanor? Yes. Marion looked at the photograph on the table. Some days. Then I remember fear makes people build strange rooms inside themselves. Your aunt loved us from one of those rooms. I wish she had opened the door sooner. But I will not pretend she did not love us. The kettle began to hum. Marion touched the blue tin. Bring me the letters. Annie brought them. Marion sorted through them until she found one with a magnolia stamp. "This one," she said. She wrote this after the foundation opened. Annie sat beside her as Marion read aloud. "I hope one day this fund reaches the girls whose names I may never know, the women who are told their dreams are too expensive, and the families who are made to feel grateful for crumbs. If I cannot help loudly, let this help after me." Marion lowered the page. Annie whispered. She knew. She knew enough. The phone rang at 7:30. Denise Holloway spoke with Marion for nearly 40 minutes. Annie stayed at the table but did not interrupt. Marion gave dates, names, details of checks, letters, quiet visits, the final afternoon when Eleanor brought the necklace and said Jonathan might someday understand. At the end, Marion said, "Miss Holloway, I do not want my sister turned into a saint. She made choices that hurt. But I do want the truth told whole." Denise's reply was too soft for Annie to hear. Marion nodded. "Then we understand each other." Across town, Thomas Blake and Victoria met in a private dining room at a club where the waiters knew when not to hear. Victoria had ordered coffee but had not touched it. Thomas had brought copies, not originals. He trusted no one now, not even the woman across from him. "Jonathan hired Denise Holloway," he said. Victoria frowned. "I know who she is." "Then you know she will not be frightened by our last name. Your last name is Blake, and your family's name is starting to look less useful by the hour." Victoria's eyes hardened. "Careful." Thomas leaned closer. "We need to settle this before it becomes public." "How?" "Grace takes responsibility for the bracelet confusion. We claim no theft was alleged formally. As for the foundation, we characterize the irregularities as administrative misclassification. We repay enough to quiet the board. Jonathan keeps Eleanor's reputation clean. Everyone wins. Annie Carter still remains." Thomas exhaled. "Forget the girl." "I will not. She is not the danger anymore." Victoria looked at him as if he had missed the obvious. "She is the only reason Jonathan opened the books. She is the reason he brought in Holloway. She is the reason Eleanor is suddenly human again instead of safely dead." Thomas sat back. Victoria continued, "As long as Annie stands there with that necklace, Jonathan will keep digging." "Then what do you suggest?" "A family meeting. Full board. Select relatives. We force the issue publicly. Either Jonathan admits he has lost judgment, or he accuses us in front of everyone and looks unstable." Thomas studied her. "And the footage? We say he is twisting a private family matter because of grief. The ledger? We challenge the audit before it is complete." "That is risky." Victoria's voice dropped. "So is waiting for Denise Holloway to hand our names to a prosecutor." Thomas looked toward the closed door. "If we do this, we need affidavits. Grace will sign." "She may not." Victoria smiled without warmth. "Grace has lived in that house for 30 years. Where else is she going to go?" The next morning, Jonathan received formal notice of a special family and board meeting to discuss governance, foundation oversight, and his recent conduct. It was signed by Thomas Blake, Victoria Whitmore, and 2 board members. Denise read it once, then set it on his desk. "They are forcing a room." Jonathan looked at the signature lines. "Then we give them one." "Not without preparation." "No, with everything." Denise nodded. "Then we need the final audit summary, the full security files, Grace's statement if she will give one, and Marion Carter's testimony if she chooses." Jonathan looked up. "No pressure on Marion." "Agreed." "And Annie?" Denise held his gaze. "Annie should decide whether she wants to be present. But understand this. They will speak about her whether she is there or not." That afternoon, Jonathan asked Annie the question himself. She listened quietly, standing in the laundry room with a stack of folded sheets beside her. "They want a meeting," he said. "Victoria, Thomas, members of the board. Denise believes they may try to make you and your mother sound like opportunists." Annie's face did not change much, but her hands tightened around the sheet. "Do I have to be there?" "No." "Will they talk about me if I'm not?" "Yes." "Then I'll be there. You should speak with your mother." "I will." Jonathan nodded. "I am sorry this keeps reaching you." Annie looked at him then. "It reached me the day I got on the bus wearing Aunt Eleanor's necklace. Maybe before that. Maybe the truth was already walking toward this house, and I was just the one carrying it." Jonathan had no answer again. By evening, Annie and Marion sat together at their kitchen table with the blue tin open between them. Marion was tired, but her eyes were clear. "We go," Marion said. Annie studied her. "Both of us?" "Both of us. Your aunt spent too long being discussed in rooms where her own people were absent." Annie touched the letters. "What if they humiliate us?" Marion closed the tin. "Then they will have to do it to our faces." On the day before the meeting, Victoria stood alone in Eleanor's sitting room. The curtains were drawn. The room smelled faintly of furniture, polish, and old flowers. She looked at the portrait on the wall and spoke as if Eleanor could still hear. "You should have stayed gone." Then she turned away and called Mrs. Grace. "Tomorrow," Victoria said, "you will remember who protected your job." Mrs. Grace's answer came small. "Yes, ma'am." "And Grace?" "Yes." "If you fail me, Jonathan will not be the one you should fear." The line went dead. Mrs. Grace stood in the service hallway holding the phone long after Victoria hung up. For the first time, she looked toward the laundry room where Annie was working and wondered whether loyalty to the wrong person could become a cage with the door locked from the inside. The meeting was set for 10 in the morning, but the house began preparing before 7. Chairs were carried into the main parlor. Coffee was placed on the sideboard. Bottled water stood in straight rows. The long table that usually held flowers now held folders, notepads, and name cards printed on thick cream paper. Annie arrived with Marion at 9:30. They came through the front gate, not the service entrance. That had been Jonathan's instruction, but Annie still slowed when the driver stopped near the main steps. For 2 weeks, every path she knew in that house had led through the back. The front door felt less like wood and brass and more like a question. Marion noticed. "Lift your head." Annie did. Her mother wore the navy dress again, with a gray shawl over her shoulders. She had taken her medicine, rested the night before, and pinned her hair with care. Annie knew Marion was tired. She also knew her mother would rather collapse on that front walk than let anyone inside see it. Jonathan opened the door himself. That surprised the staff waiting in the hall. Mrs. Grace stood near the side table, pale, hands folded. Her eyes went to Marion first, then to Annie, then quickly away. Jonathan stepped aside. "Mrs. Carter, Miss Carter, thank you for coming." Marion gave him a measured nod. "Mr. Whitmore." He did not correct her. "Not today." Annie entered behind her mother. The necklace rested beneath her blouse, close to her skin. She had thought about wearing it where everyone could see, but Marion had said, "Truth does not need jewelry to announce itself." So Annie kept it hidden. Victoria was already in the parlor when they walked in. She wore black, not morning black, but the kind of black chosen to make authority look like restraint. Thomas Blake sat beside her with a leather folder closed in front of him. 2 board members spoke in low voices near the fireplace. Denise Holloway stood at Jonathan's side, calm, a yellow legal pad in one hand. Victoria looked Marion over with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mrs. Carter, I'm glad you felt well enough to join us." Marion answered without missing a beat. "I'm glad you felt able to say that out loud." Annie looked down for half a second to hide the surprise on her face. Denise's mouth moved slightly, almost a smile. Jonathan gestured toward 2 chairs beside him. Victoria noticed the placement at once. "Jonathan," she said softly, "perhaps the Carters would be more comfortable near the back. This is a board matter." Jonathan pulled out Marion's chair. "This is an Eleanor matter." No one argued after that. When everyone was seated, Thomas opened his folder first. "Since we are all here, I suggest we maintain structure. The purpose of this meeting is to address recent instability in household management, foundation oversight, and Mr. Whitmore's decision-making following the appearance of Miss Carter and Mrs. Carter." Denise wrote something down. Jonathan leaned back. "You make them sound like a weather event." Thomas ignored that. "The board has a duty to protect the foundation and Whitmore Holdings from emotional decisions." Marion's hands rested in her lap. Annie could see one thumb pressing into the other. Victoria spoke next. "No one denies that Mrs. Carter may have known Eleanor. No one denies that Miss Carter has some sentimental connection to a necklace. But we must separate feeling from fact. Jonathan has changed staff procedures, brought in outside legal counsel, threatened the reputation of the foundation, and turned this house against long-serving employees based on grief and guilt." Annie felt the room move around that word, guilt. They kept using it like it made him weak. Jonathan did not answer. He let them continue. Thomas slid a document forward. We have prepared a recommendation. Temporary governance review. Restricted unilateral authority over the foundation pending medical and board evaluation. All inquiries into alleged financial irregularities paused until a neutral committee is formed. Denise looked at the paper but did not touch it. A neutral committee chosen by whom? Thomas smiled. The board. The same board that received annual reports prepared by you? His smile thinned. Miss Holloway, your tone is unnecessary. My tone is free. Your paperwork is the concern. One board member shifted in his chair. Victoria turned to Marion. Mrs. Carter, I do not wish to be unkind, but you must understand how this appears. You and your daughter entered our lives with a story about Eleanor, and within days Jonathan began questioning everyone who has served this family for years. Marion looked at her. Maybe everyone who served this family for years needed a question or two. Victoria's face cooled. You were not here. No, Marion said. That was the point, wasn't it? The room fell quiet. Victoria leaned forward. Eleanor chose not to bring you here. Marion's voice stayed even. Eleanor chose survival in a house that made honesty expensive. Thomas cut in. That is an emotional interpretation. Marion turned to him. Most truth sounds emotional to people who profited from silence. Annie felt something rise in her chest. Pride, maybe. Fear too. Her mother was not raising her voice, but every sentence carried years. Victoria shifted her attention to Annie. And you, Miss Carter? What exactly do you want from this family? Annie had known the question would come. It still struck. Jonathan started to speak, but Annie answered first. I came for a job. Victoria's brows lifted. And now? Now I want my mother respected. I want my aunt's name left clean. I want people to stop acting like being poor makes everything I say suspicious. Thomas gave a small laugh. No one said that. You didn't need to, Annie said. Mrs. Grace searched my locker because the room already believed it. All eyes moved to Mrs. Grace, who stood near the door as a household witness. Her face tightened. Victoria gave her a warning look. Thomas opened another page. Mrs. Miller has provided a statement that the search was conducted out of concern for household property, not prejudice or malice. Denise looked toward Mrs. Grace. Is that your full statement? Mrs. Grace's throat moved. Yes, ma'am. Denise set down her pen. Grace, before you hold to that, you should know we have video from the auxiliary system, and we have preserved it with timestamps. Mrs. Grace did not look at Victoria this time. She looked at the floor. Victoria spoke sharply. This intimidation is inappropriate. Denise turned to her. No one is intimidating her. I am giving her the courtesy of not lying into evidence. Mrs. Grace's hands began to tremble. Thomas said, Grace, you are not required to answer questions from Miss Holloway. Jonathan finally spoke. But she is required to answer mine. Mrs. Grace looked up. Jonathan's voice was quiet. Did you remove Eleanor's bracelet from the supply closet after Thomas placed it there? Victoria stood. Jonathan, sit down, he said. She froze. He had not shouted. That made it worse. Mrs. Grace opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, yes. The word moved through the room like a dropped glass. Jonathan did not take his eyes off her. Why? Miss Victoria told me Mr. Blake needed it handled. Victoria's face hardened. That is not what I said. Mrs. Grace looked at her, and something tired inside the older woman seemed to give way. You said the girl had to remember the staff door. You said if Mr. Whitmore started treating her like family, all of us would suffer the mess. Victoria's chair scraped back. You ungrateful woman. Mrs. Grace flinched but kept speaking. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But don't make me carry all of it. Thomas closed his folder. This is becoming disorderly. Denise opened her briefcase and took out a flash drive. Then let us restore order with records. Jonathan nodded. Caleb Price, who had been waiting in the hall, entered and connected the drive to the parlor screen. The footage played. Thomas entering Eleanor's room, Victoria waiting in the corridor. Thomas leaving with the bracelet. The placement near the laundry wing. Mrs. Grace retrieving it. No one spoke during the video. When it ended, Denise passed copies of the forensic preservation report down the table. The footage is unedited. Timestamps verified. Chain of custody. Documented. Thomas stared at the report. This proves mishandling of jewelry, not fraud. No, Denise said. Fraud comes next. Jonathan opened the folder in front of him for the first time. The Eleanor Foundation was created to fund scholarships, medical assistance, and community programs. Over 6 years, millions were transferred through shell vendors and false service agreements. Thomas prepared the paperwork. Victoria approved disbursements. I signed reports I should have read. He did not spare himself, and that made the room listen differently. Robert Hales, the board member, leaned forward. Millions? Denise passed another set of documents. Preliminary audit. We have bank trails, vendor records, duplicate invoices, and payments tied to entities controlled through Mr. Blake's associates. More will follow. Thomas stood. I will not sit here and be defamed. Denise looked up. Then remain standing while you read page 4. Victoria's control cracked. This is why I warned you. Look at him. He is letting strangers tear down his own house. Annie stood before she planned to. I'm not a stranger to Eleanor. Victoria turned on her. You are a girl who walked in with a mop and decided she deserved a seat at the family table. Annie's voice came steady. No, I walked in with a mop because my mother raised me to work. But your family taught my aunt she had to hide the people she loved. That is the shame in this room, not me. No one moved. Marian closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them with pride shining through exhaustion. Jonathan looked at Annie as if Eleanor had spoken through the one person the house had tried hardest not to hear. Victoria's face flushed. How dare you? Annie did not step back. You asked what I wanted. I want you to stop calling cruelty protection. The front door opened before Victoria could answer. 2 men in dark suits entered with a woman carrying a state investigator's badge. Denise had arranged it quietly. Jonathan had approved it before the meeting began. Thomas looked at Denise. You called investigators? Denise replied. No, I notified the appropriate authorities of preserved evidence. They decided to come. The woman showed her badge. We need to speak with Mr. Blake and Miss Whitmore regarding foundation disbursements and evidence tampering. Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came out. Jonathan stood. You will have full cooperation from this house. Thomas looked at the board members, then at Victoria, then at the documents on the table. For once, his polished words failed him. Mrs. Grace began to cry quietly near the door. Not loudly, not for attention. Marian did not look at her. Annie did, but only for a moment. Pity was not forgiveness. As the investigators moved toward Thomas and Victoria, Annie touched the necklace beneath her blouse. It was still hidden. It did not need to be seen. The whole room had already felt its weight. The investigators did not raise their voices. That made the room feel colder. The woman with the badge introduced herself as Special Agent Karen Doyle from the State Financial Crimes Division. The 2 men with her began identifying documents on the table, while Denise Holloway handed over a sealed folder and a copy of the preserved security report. Thomas Blake found his voice first. This is unnecessary, he said. I am counsel for the family and the foundation. Any records you think you have are subject to privilege. Agent Doyle looked at him without interest in his performance. Not records used to conceal financial misconduct. Thomas turned to Jonathan. You are making a mistake. Jonathan stood near Marian's chair. No, Thomas. I made the mistake years ago, when I stopped reading what you put in front of me. Victoria gave a short laugh, brittle and sharp. Listen to yourself. You are handing your family to strangers. Marian spoke before Jonathan could. No, ma'am. He is handing the truth to people who know what to do with it. Victoria's eyes cut toward her. You should be very careful enjoying this. I'm not enjoying anything, Marian said. My sister's name was used as a hiding place for theft. There is no joy in that. Annie remained beside her mother, hands folded. She had imagined, in a small hidden part of herself, that the moment truth came out would feel like relief. It did not. It felt heavy. It felt like watching a house discover rot beneath polished boards. Necessary, but not sweet. Agent Doyle turned to Victoria. Miss Whitmore, we are not placing anyone under arrest at this moment. We are requesting that you and Mr. Blake come in for formal questioning. You may have counsel present. Thomas lifted his chin. I am counsel, Denise said. You will need your own. One of the board members coughed into his hand. No one else made a sound. Victoria looked at the room, searching for someone willing to stand with her. Robert Hales looked away. Mrs. Grace stared at the floor. Thomas was busy protecting himself. Jonathan did not move toward her. So this is what we do now, Victoria said. We invite investigators into Eleanor's parlor? Jonathan's answer was quiet. You brought theft into her foundation first. That silenced even Victoria for a moment. The investigators began collecting copies, not originals, documenting each item with patient care. Denise answered questions. Caleb provided the chain of custody for the video files. The board members sat rigid, as if any movement might pull them into the center of the damage. Mrs. Grace finally stepped forward. Agent? Everyone turned. Her voice trembled. If I give a statement, do I have to do it here? Agent Doyle softened by a fraction. No, ma'am. We can speak privately. Victoria snapped. Grace, you say one more word, and you will regret it. Jonathan's tone cut across the room. She has regretted enough on your behalf. Mrs. Grace looked at him, and Annie saw years of dependence, fear, and small compromises pass through the older woman's face. I moved the bracelet, she said, barely above a whisper. I knew it was wrong. Miss Victoria told me the girl needed to be reminded that kindness from Mr. Whitmore did not change her place. Mr. Blake told me no one would be hurt if I followed instructions. Thomas spoke sharply. That is false. Mrs. Grace looked at him. You said a scare would end it. Thomas's jaw clenched. Agent Doyle made a note. We'll take your full statement separately. Victoria laughed once. You think they'll protect you, Grace? You think she will? She pointed toward Annie. After what you said about her? Annie felt every eye move toward her again. Mrs. Grace did not look up. Annie did not feel ready to forgive. She did not even want to be asked for it. But she saw the trap Victoria had set. Make Annie cruel. Make her seem hungry for revenge. Make the whole room forget who had begun the harm. So Annie said only, that's between Mrs. Grace and the truth now. Marion's hand brushed Annie's arm under the table. Jonathan heard it too. The restraint in Annie's answer moved him more than anger would have. Thomas gathered his coat. I will come voluntarily, but I will not be treated like a criminal. In a home I have served for years. Denise looked at him. Service is not the same as loyalty. He gave her a cold look and walked toward the door with one investigator beside him. Victoria lingered. She faced Jonathan. When this becomes public, they will not remember your virtue. They will remember that the Whitmore family let a Maid story destroy a foundation. Jonathan stepped toward her, not close enough to threaten, close enough to end the performance. No, they will remember that a young woman with a mop told the truth faster than the people paid to protect it. Victoria's face tightened. Annie did not lower her eyes. Agent Doyle gestured toward the door. Miss Whitmore. Victoria turned and walked out, her steps controlled until she reached the hall. Only then did Annie hear one uneven breath. When the front door closed behind them, the room did not relax. The danger had changed shape, not disappeared. Robert Hales stood first. Jonathan, the board will need an emergency session. Jonathan looked at him. You just had one. This affects governance, public trust, donors' liability. Denise interrupted. And restitution. Do not forget the people the foundation failed while money was being diverted. Robert's face reddened. Of course. Marion spoke from her chair. Names. He turned. Pardon? The people. Not just numbers. If Eleanor promised scholarships, then somewhere there are names of people who were told no because the money was gone. Robert had no answer. Jonathan looked at Denise. Can we find them? Yes, Denise said. Denied applications, wait lists, unfunded grants. It will take work. Do it. Denise wrote it down. Annie turned to her mother. Are you all right? Marion nodded, but she looked tired enough that Annie rose at once. We should go home. Jonathan stepped forward. I can have the car brought around. Marion shook her head. Thank you, but no, not today. He accepted the refusal. May I call later? You may call tomorrow. That too, he accepted. As Annie helped Marion stand, Mrs. Grace approached them. Her face had lost its practiced authority. She looked older than she had that morning. Mrs. Carter, she said. Marion waited. I was unkind to your daughter. Yes, Marion said. I was wrong. Yes. Mrs. Grace's eyes filled, but her voice remained small. I am sorry. Annie watched her mother. Marion did not rush to soften the moment. Finally, Marion said, an apology is a door. It is not the whole road. Mrs. Grace nodded, almost relieved not to be forgiven too quickly. Annie and Marion left through the front door. Jonathan walked them out but did not follow past the top step. He seemed to understand that some exits had to be given space. Outside, the air smelled of cut grass and rain coming later. Annie helped Marion down the steps. Near the driveway, Marion paused and looked back at the house. For years, she said, I imagined this place taller. Annie looked at it too. It still looks tall to me. It is, Marion said, but not as tall as fear made it. The driver opened the car door. This time, Marion accepted the ride. Not as charity, but because her breath was thin, and pride did not require punishing the body. On the way back to North Charleston, Marion held the blue tin in her lap. Annie sat beside her, the necklace under her blouse, her fingers resting near it but not touching. Do you feel better? Marion asked. Annie thought about it. No. Good. Annie turned to her. Good? Better can come later. Today was for honest. At the Whitmore house, Jonathan returned to the parlor after everyone had gone. The chairs were still out of place. Coffee had gone cold on the sideboard. The screen remained dark at the front of the room. Eleanor's portrait hung above the mantel. Jonathan stood before it. I am sorry, he said. The words were not enough. He knew that. They did not give Eleanor back her voice, did not erase Marion's years of silence, did not remove the shame from Annie's first day in his house, did not return the stolen foundation money to the people who needed it. But apology was a door. He had heard that from Marion, and he held on to it. Denise entered behind him. The investigators will move quickly. Good. They may recommend public disclosure. Good. You understand what that means? Jonathan turned from the portrait. It means people will finally learn what my family hid behind good manners. Denise studied him. And Annie? What about her? She is not a symbol. Do not make her one because it eases your guilt. Jonathan nodded slowly. She is a person. Yes. I know. Denise's answer was firm. Knowing has to become policy. For the first time that day, Jonathan almost smiled. You sound like Eleanor. No, Denise said, gathering her files. I sound like a woman who has watched rich men discover morality after the bill comes due. He took that without defense. By evening, Victoria sat alone in the back of a state vehicle. Not handcuffed. Not yet. But no longer in control of where she was going. Thomas sat in another car ahead of her. She looked out at the Charleston streets passing by and thought of Annie Carter standing in the parlor, calm enough to wound her without raising her voice. A girl with a mop. A girl she had dismissed before learning her name. Victoria pressed her nails into her palm. This was not over, she told herself. But for the first time, the words sounded less like a threat and more like fear. The day after the meeting, the Whitmore house did not feel victorious. It felt exposed. News had not reached the papers yet, but the staff already moved as if every wall had grown ears. Mrs. Grace had been relieved of her duties pending further review. Thomas Blake was no longer authorized to act for the family or the foundation. Victoria had not returned from questioning until late, and when she did, she went straight to the guest suite without speaking to anyone. Jonathan spent the morning with Denise Holloway and the forensic accountants. He signed preservation orders, donor notices, bank authorizations, and letters to board members who had suddenly discovered concern now that investigators were involved. He read every page before signing. It took longer that way. He did not complain. By early afternoon, Denise closed her folder. You should rest. I've rested for years, Jonathan said. That was the problem. Exhaustion does not improve judgment. He looked at her, then set down the pen. Fair. She softened by half an inch. Call Mrs. Carter. Not about the case. About the people. Jonathan understood. He waited until 3, then called Marion. Annie answered. Mr. Whitmore? Yes, Miss Carter. Is your mother available? She's resting. I can call later. Annie hesitated. Is it about the investigation? No. I wanted to ask whether she would allow me to visit. No lawyers. No folders. Just me. A pause. She'll ask why. Tell her I owe her something that cannot be mailed. Annie covered the phone. Jonathan heard muffled voices, then quiet. When she returned, her tone had changed. She said you may come at 6, and she said if you bring flowers, don't bring lilies. Aunt Eleanor hated lilies at funerals. Jonathan closed his eyes. I remember. At 6, he arrived with no flowers. Instead, he carried a small paper bag from a bakery Marion had once mentioned in passing. A place near Meeting Street that made lemon pound cake the way her grandmother used to. Annie noticed the bag and did not comment, but Marion did. Eleanor told you that? She did, Jonathan said. I should have listened to more things she told me. Marion let him in. The apartment was tidier than usual, which Annie knew meant her mother had pushed herself too hard. A fresh cloth covered the table. 3 glasses of iced tea waited. The blue tin sat closed near Marion's elbow. Jonathan placed the bakery bag on the counter. This is not payment. Marion looked at him for a moment. Then it may stay. They sat at the table. For a while, no one mentioned Victoria, Thomas, money, or the foundation. Marion cut the pound cake into thin slices. Annie poured tea. Jonathan accepted his glass with both hands as he had before. Finally, Marion said, You said you owed me something. Jonathan set his glass down. Yes. He turned to Annie first. Miss Carter, what happened in my hallway should not have happened. I have said that before, but I have not said it correctly. I accused you because the house had taught me to see labor before personhood, and grief before truth. I let a girl on her knees carry the weight of my loss. That was wrong. Annie kept her hands around her glass. Thank you for saying it. I also understand that saying it does not repair it. No, sir, it doesn't. He nodded. Then he turned to Marion. Mrs. Carter, Eleanor should not have had to hide you. She should not have had to decide which part of herself could enter my home safely. I cannot undo what my family made her fear, and I cannot undo what I failed to notice. But I can stop pretending that her silence was peace. Marion's face held steady, but her eyes grew wet. She loved you. I know. She was afraid too. I know that now. Marion looked toward the blue tin. I used to resent her for sending money in envelopes instead of walking through my door in daylight. Then she would come, and I'd see how thin she looked from carrying 2 lives. The one with you, and the one with us. Jonathan's voice dropped. I wish I had known. I wish you had asked better. That landed, and he accepted it. Annie watched the 2 of them across the table. This was not forgiveness. It was more honest than that. It was a room where the dead were finally being discussed without being polished smooth. Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and took out an envelope. Marion's expression hardened at once. I told you, it is not money, he said. She waited. He opened the envelope and removed a photograph. Eleanor, younger, sitting in the garden at Whitmore House with her hair pinned back. One hand lifted, as if telling whoever held the camera to stop. She was laughing. Marion took it slowly. Annie leaned closer. She had seen solemn pictures of Eleanor, formal ones, society pages, charity programs. This was different. Here, Aunt Eleanor looked like the woman in Marion's old church photo. She hated that picture, Jonathan said. Said it made her look caught. Marion smiled despite herself. She always hated being photographed when she was laughing. Said her mouth got too wide. It did, Jonathan said. His own smile trembled. I loved it. Marion traced the edge of the photo. May I keep this? Yes, I brought it for you. The apartment went quiet. Then Marion stood, slower than usual, and walked to the shelf near the sink. She took down a small frame, removed an old calendar print, and placed Eleanor's photograph inside. She set it beside Annie's graduation picture. Jonathan watched. His face changed when he saw the 2 photographs together. Family, not hidden, not grand, not announced. Just placed where a morning cup of coffee would see it. Annie noticed his eyes lower to the floor near the table. Her cleaning cloth from the kitchen had slipped from the counter earlier and lay near his shoe. It was old, frayed at one edge, damp from where she had wiped the stove. Jonathan bent and picked it up. Annie stiffened, remembering the hallway, the mop, the accusation. He noticed. "May I?" She nodded. He folded the cloth once and set it over the sink. He did not make a speech. That made the act matter more. Marion saw it too. She sat back down, tired but calm. "A man can learn late," she said. "But late learning still has to show up on time after that." Jonathan gave a small breath that might have been a laugh if it carried less regret. "I will remember that." He looked at Annie. "I would like to help with school." Annie's body went still. Marion did not speak for her. Jonathan continued, "Careful now. Not as a bargain, not as payment for what happened. If you refuse, I will still continue the investigation and the foundation repair. If you accept, it will be because Eleanor wanted girls like you to walk through doors without begging." Annie looked at her mother. Marion said, "Answer for yourself." Annie took time. "I don't want to be bought." "You won't be. I don't want people saying I got in because a rich man felt guilty." "People may say many foolish things," Jonathan said. "That does not make them true. I want to work." "Then work. At the foundation, not in the house. I want to help find the people Aunt Eleanor's money was supposed to reach." Jonathan looked at Marion, then back at Annie. "Done. You can't just say done." "I can if I mean we will make a proper position, with Denise reviewing it, paid fairly, with duties that match the work." Annie studied him. "And school? Tuition, books, transportation. In Eleanor's name, if you prefer, or anonymously." Annie touched the necklace through her blouse. "In her name. But not just for me. If the foundation is going to be repaired, I don't want to be the only girl who gets through the door." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Then you won't be." Marion leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. Annie reached for her hand. "I'm fine," Marion said. "You're tired." "I'm old enough to be tired and fine at the same time." Jonathan stood. "I should go." At the door, Marion stopped him. "Jonathan." "Yes?" "Do not make Annie your redemption." He looked toward Annie, then back to Marion. "No. Make yourself useful. There's a difference." He nodded. "I'm beginning to understand." After he left, Annie stood at the window and watched his car pull away. Marion came beside her with the framed photograph of Eleanor in her hands. "He picked up the cloth," Annie said. "I saw. It felt strange. It should. The first time a proud man bends for the right reason, it unsettles the room." Annie looked at her mother. "Do you trust him?" Marion thought for a long time. "I trust that he is ashamed. I trust that he loved my sister. I trust that he is trying to learn how not to turn shame into control." "That's a lot of trust." "No," Marion said. "That's a short leash." Annie laughed softly. The first easy sound in days. Marion placed Eleanor's photograph beside Annie's graduation picture again. "Tomorrow, we start asking what your aunt wanted that money to do. And if people don't like it?" Marion looked at her daughter, then at the necklace hidden beneath her blouse. "Then they can take a number." Across town, Victoria sat alone in the guest suite of the Whitmore house, reading a message from Thomas Blake. "Say nothing. Destroy nothing. Call no one." She deleted it, then looked toward the closed door. For the first time, the house did not feel like hers. Downstairs, Jonathan entered Eleanor's sitting room. The gray curtains Victoria had chosen still hung there. He stood before them, then called for the house manager. "Take these down tomorrow," he said. "Find the yellow ones Eleanor kept in storage." The manager nodded. "Yes, sir." Jonathan looked around the room. It would take more than curtains, more than apologies, more than money returned. But every repair had to begin somewhere visible. That night, before leaving the room, he wrote one sentence on a blank page and left it on Eleanor's desk. No more hidden family. 3 months later, Annie stood outside Charleston Community College, with a folder pressed to her chest, and the old silver necklace tucked beneath her blouse. The morning was warm, but not heavy. Students crossed the walkway with coffee cups, backpacks, and schedules in their hands. Cars pulled up along the curb. Somewhere near the library, someone laughed too loudly, and the sound made Annie smile before she could stop herself. Marion stood beside her, one hand resting on Annie's arm. She looked stronger now. Not healed in the way people say when they want a story to end neatly, but better. Her breathing had improved after new treatment, and the doctor Jonathan recommended had spoken to her as if she had a right to understand her own body. Marion liked that most of all. "You have everything?" Marion asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Schedule?" "In the folder." "Notebook?" "In my bag." "Bus card?" "Mama, I'm allowed one morning of fussing. You had 3 months. And I used them well." Annie laughed softly. Jonathan stood a few steps away near the car, giving them room. He had learned to do that. At first, he offered too much too quickly. Rides, appointments, checks, introductions. Marion had stopped him each time with the same steady look. Eventually, he began asking before acting. That change mattered more to Annie than any promise. He wore a simple jacket and held nothing in his hands. No envelope. No gift. No speech. "You sure you don't want me to walk in with you?" Marion asked. "I'm sure. I can wait outside. You already said that. I may say it again." Annie turned to her mother. "You can go home and rest." Marion lifted an eyebrow. "Are you telling your mother what to do on your first day of college?" "No, ma'am. I'm suggesting wisely." "That sounds like telling with manners." Jonathan looked away, smiling. Marion saw him. "Don't encourage her." "I wouldn't dare," he said. That small exchange would have been impossible months earlier. Back then, Jonathan was a name in a house that had accused Annie before it knew her. Now he was still Mr. Whitmore most days, sometimes Jonathan when Marion forgot to keep distance, never family in a way that erased the past. But he was present. He called before visiting. He listened more than he spoke. He sat at Marion's kitchen table without trying to fix every silence with money. The Eleanor Foundation had changed too. Denise Holloway had taken temporary oversight while investigators continued reviewing the missing funds. Thomas Blake had been charged with financial crimes related to the false vendors and altered records. Victoria was under indictment for conspiracy, misuse of charitable funds, and evidence tampering. Mrs. Grace had given a full statement. She had lost her position at the Whitmore house, but Denise had arranged for her to speak with legal aid before prosecutors decided how to handle her cooperation. Annie had not asked for details. Some roads were not hers to walk. The first restored foundation grants had been approved 2 weeks earlier. Not with a gala. Not with cameras. Just letters, phone calls, tuition payments, medical assistance, and a public notice that apologized without hiding behind soft language. Jonathan had insisted the notice include one sentence. Denise wrote, "Funds intended for dignity were misused by those trusted to protect them." Annie had read that sentence 3 times. She now worked part-time in a small foundation office downtown. Not as a symbol, not as a favor, but as a paid assistant helping organize scholarship records. Denise made sure the job description was real. Marion made sure Annie still did her homework before anything else. Jonathan stepped closer but stopped at a respectful distance. "Miss Carter," Annie turned. "Mr. Whitmore, I promised myself I would not give advice. That sounds difficult for you." "It is." Marion nodded. "Let the man suffer a little." Jonathan accepted that with a small bow of his head. "Then I will only say this. Eleanor believed education was not charity. She believed it was a door that should never have been locked by money." Annie touched the folder. "I know. She would be proud." Annie looked down, then back at him. "Do you think Aunt Eleanor knew I'd get here?" Jonathan's face softened. "No. I think she hoped you would be given the chance. There's a difference." Marion squeezed Annie's arm. "And you're taking it." A group of students passed nearby. One young woman held a campus map upside down. Annie almost offered help, then remembered she was new too. Marion reached into her purse and took out the blue tin's smallest envelope. "I brought you something." "Mama, you said no fussing." "This is not fussing. This is history." Inside was Eleanor's note, the one Annie had carried into Whitmore House as proof. Marion had placed it in a clear sleeve to protect it. For Annie, when she is old enough to keep something that matters, tell her it comes with love, not obligation. Annie read it again, though she knew every word. "You don't have to keep it in your bag," Marion said, "but I thought today it should come with you." Annie held the note carefully. "I'll bring it back." "No," Marion said. "Keep it. I kept it long enough." Annie looked at her mother, then folded the sleeve into her folder. Jonathan's eyes had gone wet. but he did not turn the moment into his own grief. That, too, was something he had learned. A bell rang somewhere on campus. Annie took a breath. "I should go," Marian nodded, but did not let go right away. "Remember what I told you?" "Which thing?" "All of it." Annie smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Marian pulled her into a brief hug. "Work hard, eat lunch. Don't let anyone make you feel grateful for what you earned." "I won't." Jonathan offered his hand. Annie looked at it, then shook it. His grip was warm, formal, a little unsteady. "Thank you," he said. Annie tilted her head. "For what?" "For carrying what Eleanor could not say." Annie thought about that. "I didn't know I was carrying it. Most people don't know the weight of truth until someone tries to take it from them." She nodded, then stepped back. The walkway waited. Annie crossed toward the main building with her bag on her shoulder and her folder held tight. She did not rush. She did not look small. At the top of the steps, she paused and turned around. Marian stood by the curb, one hand lifted. Jonathan stood beside her. Not too close, not too far. Behind them, Charleston moved through another ordinary morning, with buses, church bells, coffee shops, and people on their way to work. Annie touched the necklace beneath her blouse. Months ago, it had fallen onto the floor of a house that thought it knew who had the right to be believed. Now it rested near her heart as she walked into a classroom paid for not by pity, but by truth returned to its proper place. She called out, "Mr. Whitmore?" Jonathan straightened. "Yes? Do you think she'd be proud now?" He looked at Marian, then at Annie, then at the school doors opening behind her. "No, Annie," he said. "I think she already was." Annie smiled, not wide, not for show, just enough to let the words settle. Then she walked inside. Years later, when people asked Annie Carter why she chose law, she would not begin with the foundation or the scandal or the wealthy man who once accused her in a hallway. She would begin with a mop, a silver necklace, and a mother who taught her that dignity was not something the world handed down. It was something you kept, even when your hands were tired. And when she spoke to students receiving the restored Eleanor Foundation scholarships, she always ended with the same lesson. Respect that arrives after power is revealed is not respect. It is caution. Real respect is what you give someone before you know who stands behind them. Then she would touch the old necklace, the one she never traded for a newer chain, and remember the day it hit the floor. Not because that was the day she became important, because that was the day the room finally learned she already was. The lesson of this story is simple. Never judge a person by their job, their clothes, their race, or the place they come from. Annie was treated like she was guilty before anyone knew her heart, yet she carried more honesty than the people who looked down on her. True respect is not something we give, only after learning someone is important. True respect is how we treat people when we think they have nothing to offer us. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.